Wherever you may be. My name is Sean.
I'm Alex.
And I'm Ian.
Hi, Ian.
And today we have one of our newest Coaster Kings members on our Coaster Kings radio podcast. Very excited. Ian, tell us something about yourself that purely defines you.
Oh Lord, that's hard. I think I'm a California kid who prefers living in the Midwest.
Okay.
Ooh.
I have no regrets leaving California whatsoever.
Yeah, okay. We're 2 for 2 on that. I feel that.
So I'm not gonna lie, I would move back to California if I found a decently priced place to live.
And a decently job,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
If California wasn't perpetually on fire, then we would talk about it.
I love its proximity to Asia, even though it's still really not close to Asia.
Yeah.
That is true.
It's kind of, if you want to jump over the pond, it's a lot easier from, the West Coast.
A 9-hour flight to Japan.
Yeah.
That's fine.
So.
And for those who don't know, I was raised in Santa Clara. This is why Northern California is my bread and butter. And lots of childhood memories at many of the parks we're going to be talking about today. So.
Yeah, the topic is kind of a fun one because we all have such a different relationship with California. I'm the latest to have been exposed to California, but of course, California Coaster King started there.
Yeah.
And I spent 7 years hopping around those parks.
You spent a lot of time in NorCal.
Oh, yeah.
Before we met, you were...
God, I was that nerd guy that was on the last Vortex train before it closed. I made a point of being the last rider with some Coaster Kings meetup. You know what? At least this color scheme was different. I'm gonna remember that someday.
You know how old I am? I remember Vortex
He's going
when it was acid
green.
When it looked like Riddler, yeah.
That's how old I am.
When all stand-ups in California had to be green.
All stand-up coasters looked like toxic waste. That was
I know,
the
right?
theme.
So funny.
Every single of the 3 stand-up coasters we had in California, they all looked like hazards, on purpose. That's the theme. That was it.
I mean, not a bad theme for stand-up coasters.
I also feel like that just screamed Paramount.
Very.
Even when they brought... Well, I guess we'll get to that.
Yeah.
We're getting ahead of ourselves. We're getting ahead of ourselves, boys.
I guess so. Before we'll jump right into the topic is about Northern California, how the theme park landscape has changed over the years. Frequently, we discuss, markets like Southern California, China is a big thing for us.
About Ohio a lot.
Ohio,
Florida,
because
of course,
everyone loves and hates our opinions on that, and so. This is a market that is really diverse, has quite a history.
Fascinating.
It's had almost any kind of theme park that isn't, a studio theme park.
Yeah.
And even that, in a way, it had.
Yeah.
So we're going to kind of talk about an underdog there. And all 3 of us are quite familiar with the region, all with different kind of landscapes and different time periods. Mm-hmm. So we're really excited.
Absolutely.
So before we jump in, we'll kind of discuss our relationships with the region. So Alex, you were born in Watsonville.
In Watson. If you've been,
you know where it is.
If you're familiar with Northern California, if you've been there and you know the cities, you know where Watsonville, California is. That's where I was born, Santa Cruz County. A pretty short drive to the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk. I jokingly, but not really jokingly, say that the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk is our family crest. That is, that's pretty much why I exist today. My parents met at the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk as ride operators in the summer of 1980 when they were 19. And so my parents, it's very close to their heart. My parents have always loved roller coasters. We lived in that region. We also lived in Scotts Valley for 4 years, if you're familiar with the Santa Cruz area. Scotts Valley is just between Santa Cruz proper and the Santa Cruz Mountains, like Highway 17. So
Absolutely,
So I lived there, and those were my formative years. I lived there from 1997 to 2001 before moving to Nashville and making my way out east, where I would eventually come to settle in Florida. So that region's very close to my heart. Some of my earliest memories, some of my most memorable memories, this all sorts of stuff. All my elementary school years can be described in the context of routine visits to the boardwalk and Great America and Marine World.
Marine World.
I still call it that.
It's still Marine World.
Yeah.
It's still Marine World in my mind as well.
I had to train myself.
You know what? After all these years, the freeway exit signs have never been changed. It's still Marine World.
Yeah.
True. Truth.
And it's pronounced M.
It's like I'm on the 70. I'm like, am I close? No, I'm only close to Marine World.
Marine World.
Marine World.
And Ian, how about you?
Oh, so I was born in San Jose, but I lived in Santa Clara from when I was born until I went to college when I was 17 in Kentucky. So I grew up in Santa Clara. My house growing up was like you had to maybe take one left turn, one right turn, and you would end up at Great America. Mm-hmm. Like I was that close. It was like 10, 15 minutes down the road.
Yeah.
So Great America, like for me, came later in my life. I didn't grow up with theme parks. My parents, that wasn't a big part of their like, I don't know, hobbies or what they like to do or their interests. But I do remember my 8th grade year, we did a trip to the boardwalk. Like I feel like every junior high school did in the region, a trip to the boardwalk, and fell in love with the Giant Dipper, fell in love with roller coasters. I had started liking roller coasters at Disneyland. And so the summer of my freshman year, my best friend in high school, Wesley, shout out to Wesley if you're out there. I feel like we haven't talked in a long time. Hi, Wesley. We got season passes to Great America, and we probably went, I would say like almost every like day, like every other day, at least once or twice a week. So I got to know Great America really, really well. Went to Marine World on my 16th birthday for the first time, which is super cute. And so that's my relationship. It was definitely like my teenage, high school years, lots of time at Great America, and very much near and dear to my heart. And also as an Aero fanboy, when I found out that Aero was located in Mountain View, like my mind was exploded, and I felt connected to the roller coasters in a big way.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
So that's my attachment to the region. I haven't visited in a long time, so it's been a while since I've been back.
Time you went to
last time was winter of 2018.
Okay, it's not too
when
bad.
Railblazer was brand new.
That's pretty comparable.
That winter.
So we haven't been back to NorCal.
Oh, actually, our last trip to Great America was before his, because we went opening, or the day before opening. We went to pass all the previews of Railblazer.
Yeah, we drove up there for a day. It was your birthday.
It was a birthday, yeah.
Oh, fun. Yeah, no. So that was the last time I was there. Was Winterfest with Railblazer.
I do love Winterfest.
Mm-hmm. It's super cute with the carousel. Anyways, so that's my relationship. Okay. How about you?
So my relationship came a little later. I kind of associate NorCal with my first like solo or adult, no parents involved road trips sort of thing,
Yeah.
So SoCal was kind of when I really started getting into theme parks. Europe, it was my family wasn't a big theme park family, so it was like Move Park Germany once in a while. Was kind of how that went. But then I really started getting obsessed when I went on vacation to the U.S. and I went to Magic Mountain once when Tatsu was new, and I was like, I have to go. And then when we moved to Valencia, in a perfect spot for a little coast nerd and training, I would spend a lot of time at Magic Mountain. And then Disneyland.
Wasn't it between a few places that you could have moved in California? And
so I had the choice of where we were going to move because of schools. And I acted like the best schools were definitely in Santa Clarita. Even though Thousand Oaks are really good schools too.
Yeah.
But obviously my mind was completely somewhere else. And I'm sure my parents...
You were going to live in Thousand Oaks. That was an option.
Well, Thousand Oaks is nice if you don't like roller coasters.
Been neighbors with the Kardashians.
Yeah, like I'm trying to
shows Magic Mountain. That's okay. That's fair.
See, the Kardashians drive their cars through Magic Mountain, so it's still cool.
We can
which you can do that too on Holiday in the Park.
We just got an email about it. We gotta send someone.
But yeah, so I guess starting around like 2014, I went to Great America for the first time. I didn't like it as much, but we'll get into that. And then I started going a lot. Like we had Six Flags season passes. Discovery Kingdom really started booming. I feel like their golden years were really when just after Superman,
Right.
So we were going a lot. There was a lot of development. The shows were cool. And so, I kind of associate that with my first solo road trip, starting Coaster Kings, or California Coaster Kings as it started. That's kind of my association. Mine is a lot more recent, I think, than you guys. But
it's funny because like I hadn't been to Great America in well over 10 years, and then I went back in 2014 with Ace at June of 2014. So that was like everything was the same but different. It was like in a time warp.
That's a great way to describe Great America. Everything's the same, but different.
But different. It's very true. It's very, very true. It's interesting how like it has had so many changes, but a lot of those haven't really changed a lot of the essence in ways that I would that other parks have. So it's interesting.
So we'll dive into our first topic. This episode will be a little more structured than usual. Sometimes we just ramble on. We have like a list, but this time we have actual topics.
I love it.
The first topic is very appropriate. It is, what was Northern California like before California integrated America? And before we dive into that, this does coincide with an awesome article that will launch the time this podcast launches. Mm-hmm. So check out a detailed version of some of the background of these Northern California parks after listening to the podcast. But yeah, so we'll start with that topic. Ian can take this one away.
I will, absolutely. So it's kind of interesting, and this is my family's background is really interesting. My dad was a Navy rat, and so my parents moved to California before I was born, but after they were married. But when my dad was a kid, he actually lived in San Francisco because his dad was a naval officer. And so in the 60s, so he remembers they used to give out certificates for like free rides and stuff at Playland in the Park and then Frontier Village. And those were the two kind of parks of the 60s. But the reality was Playland of the Park has a really long history. Not Playland of the Park, sorry. Playland of the Beach has a really long history. And San Francisco is one of the classic seaside amusement parks. But like many other parks of the era, by the 60s, it had declined. Almost all the major roller coasters were gone. I think that I did some research, and they had an E&F Myler giant coaster, which was like the world's largest portable coaster or something like that.
What you're talking about.
Yes, they had one of those.
Yes. Farms.
Oh, the one that was so expensive. Oh, no, it wasn't running, I think.
We haven't been
like
there
seasonal.
yet, but we did email their management team, and they're like, Coaster Kings, whenever you're ready, we're ready. We'll open it for you.
Well, that's fun. Yeah, I mean, Myler coasters are awesome, but that looks like what they had kind of been reduced to. So it's definitely that 1960s, like the kind of death of amusement parks.
Places like Playland at the Beach.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Now, would you say that Disneyland really taking off and kind of creating a new sort of standard that really kind of pushed over some of these NorCal parks? Because even though they're still quite a drive away, do you think it's related at all?
I would say I think that the biggest thing is Playland was on the decline beforehand, and it definitely was the victim of the kind of urban renewal movement of the 50s and 60s. They saw it as more of a blight, and a lot of people in the city wanted to kind of clean it up. And so I think that had more to do with it. I mean, because after all, Santa Cruz was able to survive and thrive through most of this as well.
Definitely benefited from the Disneyland boom. Walt Disney went there, and he loved it. And
he did, absolutely.
I'll never forget reading about his visit. He riding the Autorama, which was the original Aero antique car ride, and he was like, "Oh my God, this is the solution to the Autopia problem," which was that Autopia was a mess because it was just cars and guardrails, and they were beating themselves up. And he was like, "Oh, a center guardrail for Autopia, like this exists. Aero can do this for our Autopia ride and fix it." And so yeah. Long short of it, absolutely, I agree.
Absolutely, and I think a big thing, and then a big piece of the boom from Disneyland comes with Frontier Village in 1961. Mm-hmm. So Frontier Village was developed by people who went to Disneyland, liked it, and wanted to bring it to NorCal. Like I think a lot of parks were in the early 60s,
it's
like
funny,
the first regional boom.
It's funny you mention that because I just pulled it up.
Totally.
And Frontier Village just screams Frontierland to me. Like even the enders, I'm like, am I looking at Disneyland? Like, am I looking at it?
Was legitimately a copy. Which not a bad copy, but it was an intentional copy. Yeah. And so I think that kind of early regional park boom, you have Frontier Village, which from all accounts was incredibly charming and incredibly well done. Lots of original Aero rides and original antique Aero antique cars, cute little mine rides. So that was really well done. So that was kind of the landscape. And then you also, of course, have Marine World in its original location, kind of doing the sea park thing as well, but not really doing the coaster. Mm-hmm. No one was doing the coaster thing.
World and then the old Africa USA.
Because the original Marine World was definitely kind of coinciding with like San Diego's, interest in it. It became this rapid fascination. LA had
it was
Marine Land,
the Sea World of the North. A spillover, I guess, of the fascination with marine parks. No pun intended. And then Africa USA joined forces. No, go for it.
No, go for it.
I was going to say what's interesting though is that since we're Coaster Kings, like the coaster landscape was just kind of like just a standstill. There was no new coaster since Giant Dipper.
It was super
nothing
stagnant.
challenged that. It was very static. I mean, I guess that was all the 60s. We kind of forget how dark that was in terms of roller coaster construction before, really before the racer was built in the 70s. Like, there wasn't large-scale roller coaster construction.
There are definitely pockets in the timeline of coasters, just in general, from the inception to, like, the most modern roller coasters, where there's just pockets where, like, different kinds of attractions really take off. Mm-hmm. There's times where flat rides were just, like, the theme park market. In, like, the 80s, like, when water rides were introduced, like the Rapid Ride, when that was a thing.
Theme park contraptions that were not roller coasters.
It's really funny when sometimes the interest just shifts away from roller coasters.
But the 70s and the 90s were all about coasters.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I think that the 60s really was about theming. Like, Disney comes in, Disney introduces ultra-themed experience, which, Sean, you and I have discussed the fact that was largely imported from Europe. So don't give Disney too much credit.
I know. We get into these arguments with people.
Don't you love when people are like, wow, Efteling is the Dutch Disneyland?
We're like, no, wrong.
Disneyland is the American Efteling.
It's funny. It was literally what our conversation was about. Correct. Because, like, I was so bothered that people were commenting that.
Yeah.
Yeah, quick backstory. Alex and I got not matching tattoos, but tattoos at the same time. Mine was Efteling, and his was Disneyland. And people were commenting all over that post, like, "Oh my God, Disneyland, so great, Efteling." And then people were making the conclusion Efteling was like a copy or like the Dutch Disneyland, and I was like,
answer to Disneyland.
Step back.
No. Take a step back. Absolutely.
So I think back the hell up. Like.
So the landscape before Great America is built, which is interesting because Great America is rather late in terms of the regional park boom, and we'll get to that next. But it was really just Frontier Village, which was a smaller scale themed experience.
A little family park.
Not to mention, so you spoke of Scotts Valley. I always forget about Santa's Village was in Scotts Valley, too. Mm-hmm. There was another small scale
That was Santa's literally Village across park. The street from our Scotts Valley house. It was right on the, like, my parents were like, if Santa's Village was still open, you would be able to see it from our house.
And it was no longer with us. So Scott, those kind of small scale Disneyland inspired, and then you have the boardwalk holding it steady. Yeah. The loss of Playland is pretty significant. Like San Francisco not having a major amusement park for one of the largest cities in the country is pretty significant. But by the early 70s, it was gone.
That opened the door for the boardwalk to manifest and really hold its own against Great America once Great America.
Absolutely.
The boardwalk survived because it had its own niche, and really, even though we had the two parks competing with each other, there was enough people who wanted both and went to both for different reasons or preferred the boardwalk
one
experience.
Thing I do notice, especially in the Bay Area, like when you look at it when you don't live there or you don't travel there often, you may think like, wow, all these parks are closed, they share the same demographic, but that's really not true. Like the Bay does not share demographic.
No. Great America people
do not go to Discovery Kingdom.
Are not the same.
Totally different.
Even with boardwalks. Yeah, so that's something that I think, especially with the topic of kind of talking about these parks not cannibalizing each other while yet kind of competing, is that people have to understand that going forward in the episode, that the demographic does not necessarily
when I was a
bleed.
little boy, people were amazed that like we had Great America passes. They're like, wow, you drive the 17 to Great America
absolutely
on purpose?
Well, that's also like the most dangerous road in NorCal,
but it's one of the most deadly highways. It's stunning, it's gorgeous, but you will drive off a cliff marveling at its majesty.
Remember my first time driving there was in the dark, and I was like, damn.
Did you just die? Like, could you believe?
No, I didn't die.
I don't think
but
you're still here.
Lord, 17 though. 17 and that's some high school and like college summer memories. Driving 17 with friends to go get Marion's and go on the Giant Dipper. Classic Santa Cruz. But I do think that's true. The demographics are different. Like we talk a little bit about how like it's not like Geauga Lake and Cedar Point. You know what I mean? Like that's an Ohio example. Like those literally are the same markets. Cannibalizing each other.
Don't realize how many people live in San Jose.
And correct.
God, I'm excited. We need to do an episode now. You bring it up about like the Ohio cannibalism. Yeah. When there was 3 players.
Yeah. I'd be down. I think it's a fascinating period.
If you want to talk about Geauga Lake, you have to talk about how Kennywood ate up Westview Park and how Cedar Point ate up like Boblo Island and some other stuff and like Detroit's.
I'm making notes right now. Please hold.
Make a note, but I do think that it's not
Edgewater
something
Park
you can compare.
And Boblo Island and all of these other, and that Geauga Lake was just like the final pawn in the chess game.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's not like I said. The bottom line is it's not comparable. Like the population of the Bay Area is just so large and so diverse.
There was enough loving to go around.
There surely was.
That's why it was not a risk when Marriott moved in to do the park.
You know,
there.
we were hanging out with one of the PR managers of Great America that's gone now.
Yeah.
His name was Ross, if I'm not mistaken. And he mentioned to us, like, a lot of people kind of associate us, in the same market or associate us with even San Francisco. But he's like, we're like in San Jose County, which is the largest county in the area.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily...
Santa Clara County, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, whatever.
Right, yes.
Yeah. Anyways, he said he drew mostly from San Jose, not from San Francisco, even though a lot of people, even that work within Cedar Fair as a whole, do sometimes think that.
I feel like I can count on one hand how many times we went to San Francisco when I was a child, even though geographically we were so close.
I'm just always annoyed by the traffic.
Right.
But I mean, that's just California.
And I say that we would drive through San Francisco to go to Sonoma to visit my mom's best friend from high school, Sarah. But it wasn't about being in San Francisco. We would drive by the Painted Ladies' houses and just kind of enjoy the Golden Gate Bridge on our way up there. But it was never about like being in San Francisco. It was just incidental.
Which is funny. It is funny, but that is the truth about growing up there. And anyone who's listening who grew up in the area can attest to that, I'm sure. Like, it's a very, like we said, regionally kind of divided and geographically diverse as well area. So it has its own quirks, which we'll get into when we talk about whether or not these parks, how successful they've been and why they haven't been successful as well.
Let's see. Where? Okay. Oh, okay. So before we move on to, like, Great America, one thing I have to mention about Frontier Village is that my father went there. I mean, my parents went to all of these little NorCal parks. They're very active in, like, there is this Facebook group of, like, historic Northern California parks, and my parents would, like, send me little things that they saw in this group. Like, there's a collector in Santa Cruz that has a majority of the Aero cars from the Frontier Village Aero car ride. The Apache Thunder is the name of the little mine train coaster that was there. According to Roller Coaster Database, it is the original Mack Blauer Ensign.
Right. Isn't that wild?
And my father rode
That's
it.
wild.
God, it's like nowhere near manufacturing plant. That's crazy. Imagine being next to Aero, but then getting it back.
When was it built? 1976? Like,
it was built to coincide with Great America.
With Great America.
Like, they were like, they were like, if we can open
time
this.
To bust out the big guns. Busting out of my Mack production model Mack Blauer.
It warms my heart. I love seeing little parks like preemptively Counter-Strike with something that's like big for them, but like they're building a whole regional park right next to it. It feels so bad.
Did that too. With at the time was a very controversial move, but now is one of the most priceless attractions there. It's just Loggers Run.
Well, they did it again when Gold Striker came, and they were like Undertow. It's very interesting, that market, but I guess we'll dive into that.
Yeah. What else?
About Aero.
Oh, yes. Aero Mountain. Okay, so another fun story from my parents. My dad and my mom would go on dates to the drive-in movie theater.
To the Aero plant? Okay.
That's the type of date I want to go on.
The movie theater in Mountain View, the drive-in theater. I mean, my dad went there all through high school. He was a freshman in high school. Actually, I think he was in 8th grade in 1975. He has distinct recollection of seeing the original Aero corkscrew intact and even operating at the Aero plant because it was adjacent to the drive-in theater that he always went to. And he did. One day he asked me, just like out of the blue, he was like, "Son, was there just a roller coaster behind that movie theater that I would?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that was the Aero plant." He's like, "Is that coaster still around? That was there? Like, did they sell that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it was at Knott's Berry Farm, and now it's in Silverwood. It's still open. Like, you could still ride that."
It's funny. It's so much better than some of the newer ones.
Yeah, I'm like, that roller coaster that you saw there when you were in the 8th grade behind the movie theater is still open.
Right.
It's become a bucket list thing for me to ride roller coaster prototype or test tracks on like the manufacturing ground. Like seeing all these Vekoma videos of them testing Fly on the parking lot or testing Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm like, I want to do that. That's a credit I want to count.
Or like the Axis thing that they have at SNS.
Oh yeah, the SNS Axis thing. Yeah.
For sure.
But yeah, and then also, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, Playland at San Francisco. Playland, not at the beach, which was the little museum that used to be up there with all of the different art. Unfortunately, they're closed now.
Oh, I thought they were open pretty recently. Well, I guess they opened the last couple of years.
A couple years ago, and they had an estate sale, so like they sold off all their stuff to private collectors. But like the fascination tables from the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk were rescued and were in the hands of Playland, not at the beach, and are now have been passed to a private collector. So all of those artifacts and stuff that were there, it was a neat concept, like a museum dedicated to amusement parks. I think it was just maybe didn't have enough of an audience, but I'm just glad that like everything that they had is still being preserved because of all of the private collectors who are just like, yes, I would like 12 fascination tables like in my living room. Like,
I would like one, but I can only fit like half one in here.
I love fascination. Right. It's the ultimate blue-haired old lady game, and
it truly is.
I can't get enough of it.
You know, some people go to Vegas to gamble. I go to the fascination.
We go to Indiana Beach and play fascination.
I love it. I love it so much.
But
yeah, I say we dive into Great America, unless we got anything else to add.
Yeah.
All right, this is super exciting because I love this park secretly.
Do you? It's not a secret anymore.
It's not a secret anymore.
I told everyone. You love Great America.
So let's talk like about Great America in like the time frame where it's built, which is it opens in 1976. We talk a lot about the regional park boom. And so this is kind of late, right? Well, the regional park boom starts with Six Flags.
I like to think it lasted precisely from 1961 with Six Flags Over Texas to 1981 with Canada's Wonderland.
I think that makes perfect sense. That's a great time frame. So if we think about it like that, this is kind of late on the later end.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is Marriott deciding to build at the time three identical parks.
Yeah.
That would reach all of the country because the original other park was going to be, what was it, in Maryland?
It was Baltimore.
Yeah. It was going to be in Virginia. It was going to be, I want to say it was close to where like they ended up like where Washington Dulles was. Because there was a lot of development over there. They were like, "Oh, we've got this giant international airport. Like,
right.
We want to represent the nation's capital and like one of the most historic states in the nation with this."
It's funny because I feel like the name almost screams that region.
Yeah,
like everything is like, "Oh, America, Great America."
The irony that
the irony is that park didn't actually happen.
Get built was the one that made the most sense regionally,
right?
Being where a lot of the nation's history took place that this park would focus on.
Not to mention, so the whole thing was meant to line up bicentennial, right?
Yeah,
so it was this whole thing. And so Marriott, I mean, this is the question I always have, and I think I can answer it myself, but when they built these parks, were they among the best of the best in the original design in terms of the regional parks in the U.S.? How do you think they landed in terms of the original layout?
So I personally, I'm going to jump in first with this one because I think about it a lot. And the first parallel I always draw is to the original Magic Mountain development. The original Magic Mountain development was like white, almost like Victorian, I call it. The infrastructure was very cohesive, and the layout for Magic Mountain wasn't necessarily the best because of the hill. But I think that was kind of like what started the clean aesthetic aspect of things. So we started seeing regional parks being built everywhere, and I kind of like to believe that it all led up almost to like the Great America parks, where it was like the layout made sense, the balance of attractions made sense, the aesthetic was cohesive. I almost look at it as like the golden age of the classic American theme park. It does help that it's like really themed to Great America, but so I definitely think that Marriott almost observed the industry and coming in from like a hospitality aspect and, having working with the company personally, we still talk about these developments on our company side all the time, believe it or not, because it is still something that I guess didn't quite work out in the long run for Marriott, but it's something that they really took pride in as like a new avenue. And I think they really observed what the U.S. theme park market was doing, and they collectively decided to kind of create like a master plan, like a perfect theme park that they could clone, which is what they eventually really went with. And I think they got it just right.
Yeah, I would agree.
I agree. And I mean, now that I'm out of the region, and obviously even when I was living in California, I knew Great America wasn't the best park ever. But I think that at the time, you think about what they were doing that other parks were already having to do, adding an extra aero flume because they were so popular, which multiple parks had to add an extra flume. They built that into the plan. They built 2 flumes right into the plan. They had a looper and they had a family sit down right away. You know what I mean? Like they didn't have to bridge that gap.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that positioned them quite strongly in the market. And I think that the bones of the layout, like the circular layout, still works really well for expansion too.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that they did really smart, kind of from an infrastructural standpoint, is that they focused the center of the park for a lot of the backstage. And you may think like, wow, that's so weird because it's not accessible as easily during the daytime. But you got to think about it. When you want to expand, most parks run into the problem like almost a few years in where their expansions have to be pushed outward, but then there's already like other infrastructure there, right, that relates to the park's operation that the guest doesn't see. And Great America worked with like the large circle. They expanded the park size by building backstage areas in the middle. And by doing so, whenever they were pushing out with new attractions or with attractions that were opening roster, it wasn't necessarily overlooking backstage areas. It wasn't necessarily something that was an eyesore. And I think that the park doesn't really get any recognition for it, but the more we travel, the less I see it. And I think it was actually a revolutionary approach.
Yeah.
Well, it was almost like a poor man's version of the Disney World tunnels. You know what I mean? Like it was like that central, what is it called? I forget. There's a term for it, and I'm blanking on. But that central path that runs through both the parks is really brilliant. And then, like you said, sorry.
I think of the parks as like the Great American Parks as being like the donut, where they have this middle part that is all backstage. It's all guts, and you're like surrounded by it. Remember, as a kid, kind of thinking it was odd that like the whole park was this big loop, and you could be like in Vertigo and be geographically very close to Action Theater, but you actually were not very close in terms of accessibility.
Yeah, you know, it was always funny standing on the Vertigo plot and then like seeing this ship, like the inverting ship, and you're like, wow, it's gonna take me 20 minutes to get there.
To this ride, and we're not.
But at the same time, that definitely helped with the size, the feel of the park, feeling like it's so massive. But really, the park's overall, acreage, I guess, really wasn't. It's really the parks aren't that large, but I guess it all kind of comes down to the layout.
I think Ian is right. Like these parks came out swinging. Like they opened on opening day. They were ready for enormous masses. The original concept called for the Wizard and for the turn of the century with Grease Lightning following up either the second year
immediately.
Or the
Right, they were ready
the
for it.
Year, but it was always part of the original concept. They had major high-capacity rides from Schwarzkopf and from Huss.
And I think the timing couldn't be better because it was definitely through the early 70s that we really saw the modern theme park market just take off when it came to like innovation and rides and roller coasters. And by timing it for the bicentennial, I guess, really, they kind of had those first few years that instead of having to keep expanding every year because something new came out, they had that time to kind of collectively put all that together, and they timed it well with the Aero Looper. Well, I guess there wasn't a Looper yet,
like
the corkscrew. But
of what like to go back to like Magic Mountain's a great example of like how much building a new park looked like, what it looked like, and how it changed from the early 70s to the mid 70s. Magic Mountain was fascinated with like the idea of like transportation rides, which in turn was budded off of like the 1967 remodel of Tomorrowland, and how like the future was transportation, and Magic Mountain was all about interesting ways. What?
I know. I just find it funny because like America has such a fascination with transportation, but now you can't even take a train between two cities. Like,
public transportation is still fascinating to us. Like it's always a novelty.
Disneyland was like, wow, the People Mover is like such a fascinating concept, and then like 50 years later, it still kind of is because like
everyone's like, wow, People Mover. I'm like, yeah, people take bullet trains in Beijing and Shanghai, but okay, like.
Anyway, so Great America's concept had gone from like going from parks like Magic Mountain, where they're like they had a roller coaster and a log flume, and then lots and lots of like gentle, scenic attractions. Great America had the train. They opened with a train, and that was more or less for aesthetic purposes.
No, was the Skyride not an opening attraction?
Oh yeah, they did open with the Skyride.
No, it was.
I guess, but then it wasn't really as much about covering distance as much as it was about just like these were cool rides to have. Because
it was the greatest hits. Like every park had a train, every park has a Skyride. We're going to include it.
It wasn't like Magic Mountain where like the transportation rides were kind of part of what made the park work, because the terrain was pretty intense, like getting to the top of Samurai Summit. Whereas Great America, it was like, well, we're building a train ride and a Skyride because these are fun and we want to be able to like see the park from these points of view. They had so much. They clearly had a lot of fun, like threading the train through the whole turn of the century plot, and like the sky ride, like hovering right directly over the center of the donut so that you wouldn't miss anything, because you couldn't look directly down below you in the sky bucket, but you could look to the sides.
Well, that's, I think, the cool thing
and
about...
you would never know that there was guts of park operation directly beneath you. But
I think that's the coolest part about these parks being one of the first like full-size regional parks. You can consider Magic Mountain one of them, but again, no, those 5 years did make a difference, right? And I think that's one of the funniest things about these parks being the first full-size regional park, is that complete product was there, and like there was that. I don't know. I feel like this was before every themed area had to be different. You know, that's kind of how it is now. Like, we focus so much on theming, but that was kind of like that age where if the whole park looked the same, it was still like, it was fabulous, you know? And that's
going for like a whole vibe for the whole place. And
yeah, but so did Great America.
Well, Great America had their very distinct neighborhoods. They had
themed areas,
Yankee Harbor. They had New Orleans Square, the county fair.
Yukon Territory.
Yeah, Yukon Territory, Hometown Square, and the Entrance Plaza. They were all little neighborhoods that represented different environs for the United States. And then, of course, there was the Southwest Territory, which was always planned for California's Great America. Six Flags Great America did eventually actually build it, but not until way later.
Absolutely.
And that was, but it was always very cohesive. And frankly, those themes at the Santa Clara Park are not exactly. Really, both parks are pretty muddled.
And it's kind of been sad losing it. I always thought, especially like. We'll get to it. The log flumes being lost, I think, is a big tragedy in the Santa Clara Park. But I do want to mention, I think we sleep on the fact that Turn of the Century was the first custom looper. Yeah, like the first Aero custom looper was Turn of the Century. And like putting airtime hills on like a looping coaster was like
every
bonkers.
time I look at original pictures, I'm like, those shoulders must have been bleeding on the way out.
Oh yeah, my father wrote it.
It looks like brutal, but so good.
His aunt, my great aunt Shirley, lived in the neighborhood that backed up to the park, so he could walk to Great America. He would go to her house after school and drop off his stuff, and then walk to Great America. And we would ride the Demon when I was a little boy, and he's like, this roller coaster used to be called the Turn of the Century, and it was yellow, and it had airtime hills where the loops are. And I'm like, Dad, you're full of crap. Like, why would you lie to me?
He was not.
I'm like, that is such a far-fetched idea. But then I guess when I ride the Corkscrew at Cedar Point, I am reminded of where the headspace was when it was time to design a custom Aero looper. I was like, so like the vertical loop, this like little drop into an airtime hill and then a vertical loop doesn't sound as crazy when you think about what they did for the Great America parks.
I just think my favorite part about the Turn of the Century coasters is that they have a mid-course. Like, you have the lift hill, and then not even like 20 seconds later, there's the mid-course. And I think it's so funny.
Aero was always really optimistic about how their throughput would be.
I know, but then I already noticed with Corkscrew that they didn't even put it in. They were like, you know what? There was space for it. There was definitely an idea,
and they decided.
But they were like, what is even the point? You know, you can't even have a lift. The lift is so slow. You couldn't even have a train on top of the lift if it dispatched it immediately.
And even like Turn of the Century had the mid-course, and then like after the corkscrews and like that little 270 helix, and then there's already a break.
Another block,
there,
and then a turn to another block, and then the transfer track. Yeah,
like half of that ride is brake runs.
It reminds me of like when Revolution opened, they ran 5 trains. I'm just like picturing the idea of Aero being like, we can run 5 trains on this thing too.
Yeah,
almost exactly. I'm sure that's happened. I do want to mention before we move into like the development of the parks that there's a weird connection that I'm always proud of because I went to college in Northern Kentucky. I now Kings Island's my home park. So when Kings Island was being developed, Fess Parker, who played Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone, wanted to create a frontier-themed theme park in Northern Kentucky originally. And so that's what got the people at Coney Island shaking in their boots to the point where they went to Taft and ended up building Kings Island as we know it. He next went to Marriott and then said, hey, Marriott, let's do a project together. And then that didn't work out. So I like to think that my 2 home parks have a weird connection together in
that's
projects that right. It's really odd, but just like to mention that he really tried his damnedest. It didn't end up working out for him.
But Great America and Kings Island had that connection from before they were both even conceived.
Right.
And then and so speaking of connections in did you ever ride? I guess I'm not sure. When did you move to Kentucky? year was that?
2011.
Did you, let's see, when was Kentucky Kingdom wasn't open?
No, I was
closed,
there
right?
when I was in school when it was closed. So it
Okay.
opened right when I graduated from college. So I still have not been to Kentucky Kingdom.
You've never been to
'cause I
Kentucky
haven't
Kingdom?
I've never been to Kentucky
Okay.
Kingdom, because it was
Okay.
closed during the prime time when I would have
Yeah.
visited. I was gonna go thinking about going this summer, but
No comment.
it's
No,
always
yeah,
tricky.
and
No
Kentucky
comment.
Kingdom is.
If they're listening,
is a
hi.
lot of
If they're not
things.
listening,
But I guess since I was just wondering if you rode Grease Lightning.
I never. So that is one of my biggest pet peeves. I never got to go on Grease Lightning.
Yeah.
Never got to go on Tidal Wave. Forever in my heart. That and missing on going on Big Bad Wolf by just like a couple of years will always haunt me. But,
Yeah, the Big Bad Wolf haunts me too. Like because I never
Like,
rode that,
haunts
and I
me.
love aero
Haunts
suspended
me.
coasters.
So, anyways, but yeah. So,
Yeah.
I think if we're moving forward into the concept, what do we think about like the 80s, the 70s into the 80s? How was Marriott running these parks? Were they successful?
I think what's interesting to me is like where the similarities between the parks are obviously very apparent. The Gurney Park immediately started growing even more outwardly. They needed more rides and more capacity, and the land and the expansion ability was all there. They had, unlike California's Great America, which had Barney's Oldfield Speedway, which was the original 2-lane aero car ride. The Gurney Park had another car ride.
It was
in
like
the New
Los
Orleans
Taxis
area.
or something like that. Yeah.
And that was over where both parks would eventually build their Intamin Rapids rides. So Gurney had the additional car ride. They had an Intamin Flying Dutchman ride. Those little, it's like a wave swinger, but with little ships. So they had one of those there. There was a few rides that the Gurney Park had from the get-go that either was not in the budget for Santa Clara, or they did not need to add those upon the attendance figures, or they just simply didn't have the space. But then at no point was that more apparent than when American Eagle was built at the Gurney Park, and obviously not at the Santa Clara Park.
I think very early on, there is a couple things over the course of the history of both these parks that I always think about when it comes to their ultimate differences at the end. Is that Gurney, land wasn't as valuable, over the course as it was for Great America here as in California. And so the first thing is that it was cheaper to buy land to secure future expansion space, and there was never going to be that literally a fight over land, And then it came to ownership. Consistency is key. I mean, it's been the same ownership for so many years in Gurney. It's been pretty much two owners, right? That's where in California we've been jumping between the city and King's Entertainment and acquisition, land not being owned, land being purchased, and you lose so much time, you lose so much liquid capital just in
it stunts your growth.
And that balancing.
A growing park gets stunted by all the changing of hands.
Exactly.
Six Flags was a well-oiled.
So even if the land had the same quality, same location, just by the ownership balancing over the years, Great America in California was never grown as much as Six Flags, and then you add on top the fact that it's in Silicon Valley, the most expensive land in the U.S. Pretty much.
That land has been I don't know, weight on that park since day one, right? Even in the 70s, that land was more valuable.
Yeah.
And so the temptation of selling that land, I think, has always just.
It's always been in the back of their mind. Every asset they've ever given that park has been one that they could very easily pluck away and send to another park.
I even feel like there was a window where the current owners were literally just almost milking it, just waiting for it to be even more valuable.
Waiting for the land.
I almost feel like the crash in 08 or 07 almost saved the park in a way that the land was no longer as valuable, because I really feel like leading up to that, I mean, I guess we'll get to that in a minute, but I just didn't feel like the passion was there, because I think they realized that they could literally let the bubble grow and then sell it. And it happens, it happens to parks with valuable land.
Absolutely. I think one interesting thing I always thought was where the additions stopped, where American Eagle didn't get opened at the California park, which kind of put it, I think we talk about how we have the custom air looper, and then they built the Demon.
Yeah, they both parks
which
did Demon.
was. which had 4 inversions. That's a big deal in 1980, right?
Yeah.
And then
they were one of several parks to open 4 inversion coasters. Carowinds.
So they were keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak.
Yeah, Carowinds did first. They technically took the record with their now ubiquitous double loop, double course helix.
I love that ride.
Layout. Which would be later cloned by
a certain park in the Netherlands,
and several other places. And then, of course, the Orient Express opened. But it was the Demon was in good company as far as aerodynamics. Carefully pushing the envelope as far as how many loops can we expect people to physically tolerate.
Now, my question always was the location of Aero's actual plans to the actual Great America Parks, or, California Park. I wonder if that was the reason why they were able or moved forward with swapping out the hills for the loops, because I feel like that, especially before technology we know nowadays, it was a bit of an interesting conversion for a pre-existing ride. It hadn't been done.
Yeah,
so I wonder if
the
fact that they were at Mountain View and they could literally pop over to the park in a few minutes, and then this I feel like that was almost like the only way that would have happened. And obviously it translated to Gurney,
This is going to be your workhorse coaster for your first opening years, and then we're going to give you a very easy upgrade to your existing roller coaster.
Yeah,
it's
maybe.
going to be marketable, and it's going to be your new ride for 1980 also.
Yeah, because shortly after these rides were manufactured, they already put the first vertical loop on there, Cedar Point one. So,
and it happened. It was such an and then when they added the tunnel between the station and the lift hill and the tunnel after the loop, it was almost like they were planning on doing that from the beginning. It was like
it does feel that way.
All the Demon components fit in like perfect little puzzle pieces.
It reminds me when European parks do this thing where they open a major roller coaster and they don't theme it, and then a year later they relaunch it as a themed ride.
Right.
For me, it's like the Demon was such a perfect
trend setting.
It was almost too perfect. It was like, no, you guys. I don't think you guys came up with this idea after the fact. I'm pretty sure this was the idea, and you were like, well, maybe we don't need a roller coaster with 4 inversions.
I wonder if they were contracted, right? Because these parks are contracted way before they open.
Right.
It's a several-year project. So I wonder if these were contracted as just airtime hills and corkscrews, and then which was still pretty early development for them.
Right.
And then as these rides are being built, Aero's like, well, now we can do this too. And I think then they realized what if we just converted it? I think it just kind of all ran together. I'm not sure if it was designed in 1974 with the idea we're going to put loops in there. Because I don't even know if they knew how to do it yet.
You're right. I don't know. I just wonder if by the time they opened, they were already thinking well, maybe we can get some more mileage out of this installation.
I wonder that too, because it opened the same year that Magic Mountain opened Revolution, and that I almost feel like that took the marketing, the media hype in California for rides went to Revolution that year, and not to
correct
Century. So
and Great America in general. I think that definitely weakened the ability, because this sounds bad. Turn of the Century was looked janky compared to that Revolution.
Yeah, Revolution.
And it doesn't help that both had the name Great American. It was Great American Revolution was the opening name of the Schwarzkopf coaster at Magic Mountain.
Right.
That's so funny. I never made that connection.
The funny part to me is how Grease Lightning came lickety-split on the heels of these parks opening, and then 2 years later they were like, we need more vertical loops in this park.
Right. It boggles my mind. But I guess, truth be told, Carowinds did the exact same thing.
Yeah.
They had a perfectly good Schwarzkopf shuttle loop.
Yeah, they had a Schwarzkopf shuttle loop, and they were like, you know what this park needs? A Aero looper with 4 inversions.
Loopy-de-loop. I always wonder, because I think that in the late 70s, you had this, I call it the kind of late 70s, when the Beast opened, you had this kind of wooden coaster resurgence that was going on. And you also had the racing coaster resurgence that was going on, right? That had been going on since the Racer. Everyone was building racing coasters. We talk about Gemini being kind of a weird outlier of that. We talk about Colossus being part of that.
Yeah.
And in a way, it feels like when Marriott decided not to put American Eagle at the California park, which it didn't really have room for.
Yeah.
But they didn't even, there was no, I don't know if there was another concept they were thinking about putting for that park to expand. That was kind of them being
my question is, given the unique markets they were in, I feel like Gurney definitely had a freer run when it came to competition. There's always kind of been this thing in California where California was still California, whether there was a 5-hour drive through the desert in between the 2 metros or not, it was still the markets in a way really were connected.
I think it kind of came down to like Great America may or may not have wanted to concern themselves with a wooden coaster because Santa Cruz already had a fantastic wooden coaster.
But
that's
also,
what I was going to say. That is the truth. That's the truth.
A couple hours south on the 5, you also already had Colossus.
Yeah.
So like, we're gonna really spend that much money on another
Eagle?
Colossus?
Yeah.
Well, like no one from Southern California was going to come up to your park for your mega twin wooden coaster.
People wouldn't even come up from Santa Cruz for it because they already.
No,
had
they wouldn't.
And I think that I think that's really kind of what shaped those sort of decisions because we see there's a lot of parallels even with different ownerships, but I think that's one of the clear ones why that didn't happen because that's such an incredible investment. That I just don't think it seemed marketable enough for that region. I guess.
I think the Santa Clara Park was more eager. I mean, both parks, for as long as they were Marriott operated, went into interesting directions, like with Intamin partnerships. They were like doing some of the funkier, like they did. They were some of the first parks to do rapids rides. They were immediately on the Intamin freefall bandwagon. Both parks had edge. Although interesting enough, both parks had Intamin free falls, but they were not located in the same
in different locations
places in the park.
So funny,
relatively speaking.
Funny.
It was sort of like this funny ripple effect about how like the water droplets seemed the same, and then once the changes started coming between the parks, it set off a chain reaction of like, well, we can't do it this way at this park because this park has this ride that we didn't do at this park, so now everything is changing. The Demon was like the last great thing that Marriott could do for both parks that was of major substance because even the Rapids rides, even though they're in the same location, have totally.
But I'm pretty sure
layouts.
the Rapids were actually built after. So the Rapids were built after because we have the first gen. The one at Gurney is a first gen Intamin Rapid with the really big boats. The one at Santa Clara is the smaller one.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. So like those were interesting because they're like a weird
Six Flags developed the Rapids ride concept with Intamin for Astroworld, of all places. There's a lot of Astroworld connections because the guy who designed Astroworld in Houston also designed the Great America Parks.
Yes.
And Astroworld was like a very well loved and abused test dummy, and things like the original Intamin River Rapids ride and the original Arrow Shoot the Chute ride both wound up at that park. And so when Six Flags acquired the Gurney Park in '84, I believe that was their first move. Their second move was removing the edge.
See, it's kind of funny because when I look at the timeline, I'm like, okay, so Marriott was in charge of the opening parks for 8 years, right? Or 8 seasons. And then, but only 4 of those, they were actually like pretty much clone parks.
Yeah.
It's funny how shortly lived the copies really were.
Yeah, the similarity.
You know, I mean, it only lasted half of the Marriott years. Now look at Marriott years as in being like the shortest, lifespan.
But even then, like I said from the start, I mean, the Gurney Park simply had more rides. They also had a swing around. I forget who makes those. It's like Chance or something. But let's see. I think Dorney Park has one. It's sort of like you sit in these little 2-passenger vehicles, and they go all the way out like 90 degrees, and then back in and out, and
it's like
an
R2
and they alternate.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Kennywood had one on the rooftop of one of the buildings for a long time.
Yeah, they had them at doesn't Canada's Wonderland have one? I forget.
Yeah, Clockworkers or something.
Clockworks, yeah, something like that.
This ride used to be a lot more common. It was like a glory era 1970s ride. It was another ride that the Gurney Park got that Santa Clara did not. They had theirs located. Actually, Gurney still has theirs, I think. It's in the...
So why do you think the Gurney Park opened, this is for both of you guys, with more rides than the Great America Park? I mean, the California Park.
I think it's just because the competition wasn't in the market. Like, Chicago didn't have anything. The Chicago land area had some competition, but I think they were aware early on
that they could really be a staple.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, I think they declared themselves. I know this isn't a Gurney Great America episode, but they did somewhere along the way declare war against Cedar Point and decided. If you look at the roller coaster timelines between Cedar Point and Great America, it is uncanny. It is absolutely uncanny. Yes. The similarities between those two parks and the decisions that they were making. So somewhere along the way, I don't know if it was something that they were thinking about early on, where they were like, we need 4 car rides and we need these extra flat rides. Both of those flat rides that I mentioned were located on pedestals that were suspended over the respective aero car rides. So, like, Gurney had their Sky Coaster and their Splashwater Falls ride over where the Barney Oldfield Speedway was. The pedestal where you load for the Sky Coaster, I don't even know if it's still there anymore because now X-Flight is in that area. I can't remember.
Right.
But the pedestal that you loaded on their little Sky Coaster for was what was built for the Swing Around ride that they relocated to the Southwestern Territory. And then the similar pedestal that the Intamin Flying Dutchman ride sat on over the taxi ride in the New Orleans area, like, all that got demolished. But I thought it was kind of cute how, like, even though these rides occupied the same basic space, one was part of New Orleans and one was part of Yankee Harbor. Kind of like how the log flumes are kind of looked at as
connected
one attraction,
to each other, yes.
But the entrances, one was
I always thought it was kind of funny how that worked. Yeah,
right. And so I think what's interesting is, so to go back to the Santa Clara pack, what's interesting is, so it gets, Marriott decides to sell, and basically the initial response, even in '84, is we're going to sell it for development. And it's just amazing. So the city of Santa Clara steps in and is like, no, we don't want this to be developed. Which is the first of many, like you said, Sean, like, it's just like this park is like neutered in development constantly.
It's 2020, and like you thought it was safe early this year, and now again we're like looking at the same balance.
We're like, here we are, same boat.
To love Great America is to wonder if it will still be open in 5 years.
It's the truth.
That is the relationship you have when you love this park, is wondering if, like, the last time we went is the last time you'll go.
It's gonna be the last time, 100%, 100%. So then it's managed by by King's Entertainment, and joins its sister parks, which it's still with now, which is interesting. And I've always wondered, what do you guys think about those? The King's years are interesting because they're longer than you think about it. You always think, oh, Marriott and then Paramount, but like those King's years were pretty significant.
The years were pretty, King's Entertainment overtook operations of Great America in 1986, and that relationship happened. I had thought, just drawing conclusions and looking at roller coaster databases, like, okay, the Grizzly, which is 100% Taft King's Entertainment fingerprints.
Absolutely.
Grizzly has such an interesting and weird history. That ride was contracted by the county of Santa Clara. It was not a decision made by the Kings.
I had no idea.
That change had not happened yet. That ride predated King's Entertainment's operational involvement in Great America, and then
I guess it makes sense because it opened the year
that is how those two parties met, because they wanted a wooden coaster for that park. They had decided at long last.
Santa Clara, the city of Santa Clara was like, let's get it.
It's like, we can't do American Eagle, but like, how about this?
And they're like, we can build it on top of one of our existing attractions. We get double use out of the plot for the.
With the integration, I don't like the ride, but that integration is cool. It is cool integration.
Super pure, absolutely.
And they were like, we already know, like, our wooden coaster vehicles are going to be provided by Morgan Manufacturing. Like, that is our hometown representative, and they just didn't have a company to provide a wooden coaster for them because at the time there was not a definitive. This was really early in, like, the Din Summers era. I mean, the Phoenix was only a year old. There was no wooden coaster built in 1984. I believe it's the only year inside of the century where not a single wooden coaster opened. The only way that Great America was able to acquire a wooden coaster was to go to Kings Island and ask Kings Island. They asked another park to build them a wooden coaster, because there was no other way to get one. That was pretty much how the
Point of Beast. I want that.
Yeah, they were
really small.
They, because the Grizzly, which was based on the Coney Island Wildcat, the Kings Entertainment Corporation people, the love for the Coney Island, Ohio park died hard and slow because they eulogized those two wooden coasters for over a decade.
I know.
Because Canada's Wonderland
has
opened with not only a Coney Island Wildcat clone, but a Coney Island Shooting Star clone. And to this day, the Coney Island Shooting Star remains.
That park is still the biggest clone hole in the world.
It is. It really is.
Like Canada's Wonderland, but really it's just production.
Canada's Wonderland is. That's a different topic for a different day, but it is fascinating.
A whole podcast.
It is
like Canada's Wonderland and Australia's Wonderland, for that matter.
Ooh, we could do a Wonderland special.
Speaking of which, they had built Wild Beast in 1981, and then they built the Grizzly at King's Dominion, which was their Beast. They weren't going to build like a giant beast again,
No.
but they were like, well, let's do it. Let's throw a wooden coaster at this park. Like, this is obviously going to be successful. This is something that Busch Gardens Williamsburg probably won't do, so we're going to do it. Like, we decided we're wooden coaster people. They already had the junior wooden coaster at the time. All of these Keko parks had the junior. As a kid, I was jealous that all of the other King's Entertainment parks had junior wooden coasters except for Great America.
Well, there's one thing to say about about Keko building them in-house is that in-house always cuts costs.
Yeah.
If you build something in-house and it runs, it's like,
absolutely.
of course these wooden coasters are being popped up everywhere because they're successful and they're in-house.
And the marketing, so Grizzly and Wild Beast were successful, and they worked inside of these environments where there was thrill rides and thrill-seeking components that they had sought out for themselves. When they built Australia's Wonderland, I want to say that was 84, 85, they took the Grizzly layout and the Wild Beast layout, and they made it into much more of a family ride. They reprofiled the airtime hills between the turnarounds and made them just large swooping curves, because at the time for that market they were like, well, Australia doesn't really have like a thrilling wooden coaster. That side of Australia didn't have a wooden coaster to speak of. Like, Sydney did not have a wooden coaster at the time, and the only other wooden coaster in the country, I believe, was the Scenic Railway in Melbourne. So they didn't want to like build a very aggressive thrill ride. They just wanted something that was a novelty and that was pleasant and was going to operate smoothly. 1985, that was when the third Taft Grizzly opened.
Wildcat,
or Wildcat. And then, so for Great America, when it came time to do, they were like, I think the way the conversation went was like, well, we're actually already building our third type of this coaster, and it's going to be like a more family-friendly one. Like, do you want that? Do you want like a thrilling kind of thing like the Grizzly in King's Dominion, or do you want something that's like more? And they went with the family-friendly version. They went with the watered-down, because, again, I think what they were like was like, well, the Giant Dipper is a beloved local landmark, and if we're going to give people here another wooden coaster, I don't think we want to give them something that's going to feel like they've been tricked into something more aggressive than they were anticipating based on their experience with the only other wooden coaster in the region. That's my theory. I'm sticking to it.
It's a good theory.
Great America,
because I've always wondered that those damn flat turnaround hills are so bizarre.
The goofy little baby version.
Yeah, I'm not going to chime in on this ride because I just hate it. But
okay, as a child, I loved the Grizzly.
I don't hate the Grizzly. I only don't hate it because it's not as bad. It's just boring.
It just doesn't do a whole lot. There's that one hill,
and it still has a decent top speed on that first drop.
Okay, so my first encounter with Grizzly was 2014. I waited 2 hours. It was AAA day. It sucked. And then we rode it, and like the restraints were like super uncomfortable with like the little middle seatbelt that pushed. That like literally squishes your legs apart.
Have not been good to the Morgan trains.
So I guess I've never had the glory days y'all probably
put
had.
Out of its misery. But as a child, I'm like, when I was a kid, I thought that Morgan Manufacturing's plastic wooden coaster trains were just standard because I didn't know any better.
Right.
I went to the Boardwalk. I went to San Diego. I went to Magic Mountain. I went to Great America, and that was it. And then when I finally rode a PTC train at Kings Island, actually, and I was like, well, this is cool. I'm like, this is interesting. But yeah, the relationship with Great America and the Taft Parks was actually born out of Great America's desire to build a wooden coaster, and they went to the only place they knew how to get one, which was Kings Island. In fact, in Roller Coaster Database, it's like the builder, the designer for Grizzly is listed as like King's Entertainment.
Right.
And it's technically the only ride listed as such, if I'm not mistaken. And then so out of that relationship, they were kind of like, well, I guess Great America was kind of like, well, hey, like, thanks for the coaster.
Now, my question for you is,
like, do you want this park? Like,
so you're telling me, sorry, I'm not trying to like interrupt.
No, go ahead.
You're telling me that they went to Keko for their wooden coaster because they're the only option, but Intamin made American Eagle. Why wasn't that an option?
Well, Intamin
was it because like a price thing?
No,
because Keko could do it for way cheaper.
Did the design? It was a Curtis D. Summer design,
right?
So they did technically go to the same source.
Okay.
It was just that. Yeah, go for it.
I'm sorry. I was always going to say that Intamin's involvement with American Eagle was always kind of wonky to begin with. in terms of like its construction. So like in a way, I feel like it really was a Summers with the PTC trains.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
Like it. I think at the time, like you said, the time frame for American roller coaster manufacturing was just in a weird place, and that's a pretty good theory. The one question I have is, I don't know, I've always wondered this. I've heard this, but since I've not been to Gurney, the reprofiling of the Demon's first drop, is that like a urban myth, or is that actually true? That under Kiko they reprofiled the Demon's drop to be more shallow and like gradual?
I've never heard that. I that's a good question. So you're saying
Okay,
that like one Demon has a different drop profile than the other?
Correct. I've heard this.
I've ridden both. I love Santa Clara's Demon is always, holds a special place. I love the design of those trains with like the 3D front on them.
I mean, honestly, these drops weren't very steep to begin with.
They were not. Yeah,
they were not. No.
Turn of the century, yeah. What's amazing about the Demon at Santa Clara or at in Gurney was that this was a rare, like, one-off example of a park that had two custom aero loopers.
Right.
The Demon was like their first generation looper. For a lot of parks, their first generation looper was like a Schwarzkopf. Like for Magic Mountain, they followed up with Viper. Their second gen looper just happened to come from a different designer because Schwarzkopf was not going to experiment with anything other than loops, vertical loops. And so the fact that Gurney's first generation and second generation loopers were both arrows was kind of interesting. And then what really blows my mind is that Shockwave, for lack of, like, in essence, Shockwave was the successor to Demon. It was the replacement for Demon. It was like, this is the next generation of what the Demon was. Like, this is, we're looking at the Demon again, but after 10 years of, like, design, development, and fascination. And then Shockwave just came and went.
Right.
In the grand scheme of things, it was not even open for 15 years. That was such a short window of time. And the Demon is still kicking, y'all. Like, it's been 18 years since Shockwave closed. And the Demon is still living its best life, running Shockwave's trains, those giant mega looper trains on this little aero looper, just kicking ass. Like, I think I only rode it once. I went to Great America like 8 years ago, and I rode the Demon. It was closed most of the day, and then we rode. It was like one of the last things we rode, and that was one of my favorite rides of the day. You can tell I'm just such.
I love the. I don't know. I'm an Aero fanboy through and through, and I will tell you those Aero, the Demon first drop, like, is still like one of my first coaster loves.
Yeah.
Like I said, shallow or not, like those things throw you out of your seat and into your shoulder harness.
It's super whippy, yeah.
I can't pretend that my favorite moments of my 2012 Great America visit, I'm like, oh, X-Flight is cool, like Raging Bull. My favorite rides there were the Wizard and Demon. Like, I'm sorry.
Amen. Absolutely.
I'm so sorry, but that's just the way I am. I couldn't choose to love these rides any more than I do. But yeah, I just love that about the Demon. I love that both of those parks have changed so much, but to this day, they both have their Demons. And they do run differently, but you can tell.
Now, I know that we're talking about like the King's years, the Keko years, and but I always kind of lump the Keko years and the Paramount years together because I feel like they were, because in the end of the day, they pretty much were, just acquisitions of the same property. So let's talk a little more about the Paramount years, unless you got anything to add.
Oh, yeah.
But I always like to talk about stealth. I know that's jumping a little bit, so if you want to add anything between.
We'll get there. We'll work our way up to it because we have to talk about what are you playing?
Vortex.
Oh, I just want to make sure that our podcast is not 3.5 hours.
The 80s for Great America. I mean, they had such an impressive lineup of coasters between the Demon and Grease Lightning or Tidal Wave at the time, of course, and then the Wizard. The Wizard didn't quite survive the 80s. There was an accident on the Wizard where like the trains collided and a kid died. So that was kind of bad PR for the ride. And the Wizard ridership dwindled, and they just kind of nixed the Wizard pretty quietly due to poor ridership and growing maintenance issues. And they didn't really have like a replacement for that ride per se. One thing that they did get in the mid-'80s was the Smurf coaster, the Scooby-Doo coaster, Green Slime, Minecart coaster, whatever you want to call it. And that was the little kiddie coaster that the Taft Parks had built for their experimental Hanna-Barbera Land standalone park in Houston, Texas. They were like, let's take the giant Hanna-Barbera land that we built for Canada's Wonderland and make it its own gate.
Now, for international listeners, what is Hanna-Barbera?
Hanna-Barbera is the animation component of Taft Broadcasting. They are responsible for
Scooby-Doo.
So Scooby-Doo, the Jetsons, Flintstones.
That's fine. I think people get it.
When Hanna-Barbera Land was open, in its heyday, Hanna-Barbera Land at Kings Island, there was a ride for every TV show that they had touched, and there was so many. I just can't believe how many. And even up into the 90s, the Powerpuff Girls, Dexter's Laboratory, these are modern Hanna-Barbera classics.
It just screams Paramount Parks to me, doesn't it?
Yes.
It does. It does, though.
So
I
funny,
mean, and that's why, like you said, I think that the two do bleed together, because at the end of the day, Paramount was acquiring Kiko. The management itself didn't change that much.
Yeah, no,
they just had new IPs to work with.
It was just like Viacom is now the word. Like, we're going to do the Universal.
And I liked it because I kind of felt like it moved. Exactly. It moved from like, what is this, cartoons? Almost like the Nicklandish, like back in the day, like the Nickland. It moved towards like action-packed stuff, when we started seeing Top Gun and stuff getting introduced.
Live television too. I mean, they were responsible for the Brady Bunch. That was why, and like the Partridge Family. Both of those TV shows were huge fixtures throughout the late '60s, early '70s, and both TV shows had episodes where all the characters went to Kings Island, like opening year. The Brady's, the father. Mr. Brady, I forget his first name, but he was a designer. He was
an architect. Yeah, it's cute.
For Kings Island, that was like the story being told, and there was this whole mishap adventure where like Marcia has like this poster that she won from.
I missed little marketing like that.
Game,
damn.
And her dad had the plans, and the tubes looked really similar, and they accidentally swapped them, and then Marcia forgot.
I would 10 out of 10 recommend you watch the episode. Do not make Alex go through all this.
It's just classic.
It's classic. It is classic, and you see the racer in all its glory.
Alice is looking for she loses the plans on the car ride, and the whole family's looking around the park. Because Marcia's like, I lost my poster, and her dad's like, wait, no, those are the plans for the park expansion. Wow. So the whole park, everyone's running around Kings Island looking for there's this one scene where Alice, the maid, is looking inside of the empty barrels for the Intamin spinning barrel ride, and then they start the ride while she's standing on the platform.
This is literally...
And she runs into a seat to sit down because the ride's moving, and they literally filmed it that way. They literally filmed it with the actress standing on the ride.
And then Wizard crashes and they close it. Wow.
There was over
it's different. It's different time. But I think the last big Kiko editions, there's two. There's I forget what it was called, the Skyhawk or whatever. Those
the Intamin Flight Commanders.
Intamin Flight Commanders that they put in all their parks for a hot second.
Yeah.
And then there's
Island
Vortex.
Was iconic because someone fell out of it and died.
Right.
The same day that two.
It's a theme apparently.
It was like Black Sunday or something, where
Black Sunday.
Kings Island had two. There were two electricians that got electrocuted in the lagoon at Kings Island, and then later that day, a lady fell out of the Flight Commander and died.
Is that why it's called Black Friday?
Yeah, it's called Black Sunday. No, that's unrelated.
No,
it's unrelated. Gosh.
No, sorry, I meant Black Sunday.
But basically, 3 people died at Kings Island on the same day, and there were 2 separate, unrelated events. One of them involved a lady falling out of the Flight Commander.
Is that why Paramount bought them?
And so Paramount bought. That was after Paramount bought them around right after that. So the last edition under Kiko was Vortex when it was neon green because they built that was part of their stand up kind of shenanigans. They were putting a stand up in every park.
We're doing a stand up coaster in every park.
Correct.
And they loved.
So are we saying that Gurney was a response to putting a stand up everywhere?
No, Gurney's was first. The Iron Wolf.
But Gurney's Iron Wolf was certainly a response to King Cobra. Gurney's building Iron Wolf was a response to King Cobra.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, totally.
But I think that people oftentimes are like, oh, that both the early B&Ms went to both Great Americas. Was it definitely Santa Clara matching Gurney? I think that's not the case, only because Kiko seemed to have this plan where they were adding a stand-up in every park, and they just switched it to B&M at Great America, and then, of course, at Carowinds.
Yeah. Great America, through the 80s, it was a lot of oddball stuff. It was The Edge. It was... the
Revolution.
So that Houston Hanna-Barbera land experiment, it was only open for a couple of years. Now it's the Six Flags Splashtown Hurricane Harbor Park. But so for a couple of years, that was a Hanna-Barbera standalone family park, and they built this custom Intamin kiddie coaster. And I know for certain, besides the coaster, a handful of kiddie rides from that Hanna-Barbera land were relocated to flesh out the Great American Park. I think they gave up the ghost on the Hanna-Barbera land. It was only open for 2 seasons. And I think the last nail in the coffin for that place was the Great America acquisition, because they were able to repurpose a lot of the capital and investments and stuff that were at that Hanna-Barbera land and put it into Great America.
Okay, so if we're saying that like Vortex was the last move by Gecko before Paramount acquisition, right? Mm-hmm. But it was not a response necessarily to Gurney, because Gurney was more of a response to Gecko. Now the question is, Gurney opened the first invert by B&M. Mm-hmm. Are we going to say, like, is Paramount actually responding to Gurney, or is this another one of those unrelated events? Because to me, it sounds like Paramount is now responding to Gurney.
I have a very good theory to this. I think it was partially a response to Gurney, but I also think what was going on, and this is my theory, was that Kiko had already decided to do 2 contracts. One to Arrow for their next-gen suspended, one to B&M for this new inverted thing. And I think that they were trying to feel out which one was going to be a better investment for the parks. Well, actually, not to Kings Island, sorry, to Canada's Wonderland. My apologies, my time frames are messed up. So I personally think their idea was, we have stand-up coasters, suspended coasters are the next big thing. We know this. We have 2 options.
Now, we once discussed, just a couple of weeks ago, actually, just in passing, it's like, what if, and could completely be wrong because of the time span between opening and acquisition of Paramount, but in my head, I was like, well, are there any leadership team members at these 2 properties that started together with Marriott, even if it's late in the Marriott era, and then these parks grew aside, but they were still, in important leadership roles within these 2 parks, and could that have potentially affected their business moves because of inside
I could imagine
business relations? This is before social media, but
people just staying on board with their respective parks
because if I've been with Marriott. I got hired on with Marriott, and so did my colleague, both to different parks. And 10 years later, we're like 3 acquisitions in on one side, but we're the other person still works for Six Flags. These people still have that relationship, So I always kind of wonder if there is internal talk of like, well, no, this manufacturer brings this product out, and like it leaks to a team member at the California park,
possibly,
and boom,
definitely possible.
I also think it's also really likely that just both of these parks wanted to be at the forefront of the whole industry, and parks across the country were making moves like this.
It's funny because both these parks definitely were in the foreground at that time. I kind of forget that sometimes, like right now, but yeah.
Well, because of Great America's dark ages after, like, this sounds bad, but we do forget that up to that point, it was cutting edge.
Having a Great America pass in the late 90s, man, you were in the hottest coaster development spot.
Even as a kid, I was always kind of fascinated with the California park for like, I know
and Vertigo and then Stealth. I mean, you think about Stealth. Jeez, it's like...
Yeah. And it's funny, I didn't even realize they were made in Netherlands when I knew about these freaking rides, and I lived right down the street. But yeah, I was just, it was always kind of fascinating. Even living on the other side of the world, Great America kind of had that aura, the California park.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think throughout the 80s, both parks got similar additions that were not necessarily, and even into the 90s, maybe were not necessarily echoes of each other, but just echoes of a greater trend in the industry. Both parks did their River Rapids rides. Both parks did their Intamin Free Falls. Both parks, after the Edge at Great America in Gurney left, Six Flags replaced it with an Intamin looping Starship, and then the following year, Great America and Santa Clara opened their, Yankee Harbor themed similar version. I guess really again, there was very little roller coaster activity happening in the Santa Clara park. Even the Gurney park got a secondhand bobsled coaster from Intamin. Which, fun fact, the very first project that B&M did as their independent company was to design new bobsled vehicles for Rolling Thunder at Six Flags Great America.
So they could sit next to each other instead of the whole in line?
Instead of doing the whole log flume seating configuration. So you can still ride those at the Great Escape in New York. You can ride into B&M's very first project. Those little 6-passenger vehicles.
So Sean, to get to a point about Paramount, I always think about Great America as interesting in the Paramount parks because the Paramount parks were just weird. We talk about wonky management, they were weird parks in the way their coaster editions went. But where do you think Great America fit in the landscape of the park? What parks were the leading parks of the Paramount era? right? Because like in Cedar Fair now we have like the tier 1, the tier 2, like people talk about obviously like Kings Island, and then Carowinds is being brought up. I know that Kings Island was always going to be like the Paramount Parks sweetheart, but I think what's interesting is I think that in a weird way, like Great America was kind of number 2.
Yeah,
it's funny.
I think for
feel
a period,
like Paramount always played the tier game really hard. A small portfolio, but definitely the tier game. It was like play it safe in Canada because short season, high value.
They played it safe in Carowinds,
and then to play it safe in Carowinds.
100%.
Carowinds was underdeveloped.
Carowinds got some great additions like Vortex and Top Gun.
Both Carowinds and Canada's Wonderland didn't shine till Cedar Fair took over. But I feel like Great America was their park, and it was like, well, it's always good weather. It's year-round. We have competitive markets, super close. It was like, if we're going to break through somewhere, this is where it's going to be.
It's here. I think they did. And they had all those, like, that. They had the entertainment district planned. I think they saw the California park as, like, them seeing their whole studio park idea finally manifest in a way.
They were
it never happened.
They were super quick.
Which is why I find it so interesting that they never decided to put a Flight of Fear in the Santa Clara park, because that was their biggest studio move. And I get that like Kings Island had their own market to compete with, especially prior to it all being one company in the region. It had quite some competition. And then I know that for the same thing, Kings Dominion had to fight with fierce competition.
Busch Gardens,
but to me,
definitely.
I still
Busch
feel
Gardens, Cedar Point, and Marine World, I guess, were kind of the reasons why those respective Paramount parks were so audacious.
Not just Marine World, I still feel, and I keep lumping in SoCal, but I mean Disneyland was big enough of a staple. Universal Studios Hollywood, Magic Mountain Knott's. I mean, these are SeaWorld. These are 5 incredibly major parks, all in SoCal. And I think they still compete. Like if you're going to go on a weekend trip somewhere, are you going to go? You're going to go to SoCal, and so I really feel that all their attempts there were to break through in a way to fight with the SoCal and maybe even Marine World.
And then there's the Boardwalk.
Well, yeah. I mean, the Boardwalk has been steady piece,
like toddling along.
But Paramount seemed to kind of give up on Santa Clara pretty quickly. Like, I think that they initially had, like, a lot of strength going into it. And, I mean, you think about, Top Gun, Flight Deck, whatever you want to call it, it's, like, ruled Northern California for a very significant period of time and ruled that park for insanely longer than it should have.
You know what? Before Magic Mountain did is something I won't forget from my childhood.
Top Gun ruled that park well into Gold Strike's opening years.
Yeah.
I will be there, and, like, everyone would still talk about Top Gun, even though I've been Flight Deck for years. And, like, it was still, like, it's still the staple. I mean, still if you go in there, I think the audience that's lived there still talks about Top Gun and not the other new rides.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It owns that park. And and kind of, I love it because, like, the fact that in 1990, like, or is it 92? I'm blanking right 93. Now. But 93 inverted coaster is, like, still the queen of the park is incredible to me. And I think it's, like, it's a little sad, but also, like...
it happened that
you hit that one right. No, it's a little sad.
Then they built Invertigo, and then they built Stealth, and then Stealth left, and then Invertigo left, and Grease Lightning had left, and
then it was just the Dark Ages, which is when I was going.
It got to a point where Psycho Mouse was the newest coaster at the park.
But I want to draw the parallel again to like the value of the land. It kind of became this thing where it's like we have options. Like, okay, either this is our next breakthrough and we have the first flying coaster here and it's going to be a success, or, we just sell the park and make money. And I feel like the more valuable the land became, the more it became an option to just let it run into the ground and just sell the land to development. And how hard that sounds for theme park lovers that that's an option, from a business standpoint, it makes complete sense. Okay, well, if it's a failed project, there's always that light at the end of the tunnel that there is other options. And if you have a park in the middle of nowhere that fails, then you lost your capital.
Yeah.
But it's not really, that's like one of the few parks in the world where, like, either way, if Cedar Fair were to sell it now, it would still, it is what it is. Like, they wouldn't go bankrupt over it. You know what I'm saying? So, and I feel like they kind of went the direction.
Stealth really is the turning point, though, right? Yeah. Like, you would say Stealth is the turning point and the failure of Stealth, because like we talked about Psycho Mouse, the initial plan, right, was supposed to be opening Hypersonic XLC on that plot. And actually, so it seems like
Hypersonic XLC was going to go in the opposite corner where they
over by the Sky Tower, right?
Striker.
Yeah.
And you know how I know that?
I had no idea.
Because
really?
When I was a little boy, going to Great America religiously as a child, I was there on Stealth Media Day. I was there. My parents pulled me out of school because it was a family emergency, and we went and we rode Stealth on opening day, that whole bit. The park maps had the little, like when Stealth was under construction.
Like the little yellow square
Stealth
saying.
was under construction for almost 2 years. The whole ride was constructed and testing before they even announced it.
Back when you could still do that.
And we used to take the sky ride, and we would take pictures of Stealth when it was being built.
We have a whole photo album here,
Ian, I have to show you these photos. You're just going
to
die.
Please. I will.
But yeah, so the little starburst in the corner that said, new attraction coming in 2000, these were printed on the 1998 maps. So they were on the 98 maps and the 99 maps, and so we got used to having the little star there that said coming attraction. And then the year 2000 came, and Stealth opened, and the star moved to the opposite side of the park. It moved to the little corner of the map where there was all of this still undeveloped land, or underdeveloped land, I should say, around Splashwater Falls, where Whizzer had been. Splashwater Falls came in pretty quick after Whizzer was demolished, but it obviously didn't occupy all of the space that they had to work with there. And the little star said, coming soon, a major new roller coaster in 2001.
Well,
and so, I found out after the fact. I was like, okay, so this is the new ride that was going to happen. It didn't happen. Was Hypersonic XLC. Which they demolished the train for. Hypersonic XLC was the power move that was why they said goodbye to the train, and then that ended up falling through. And they were like, well, I guess we're going to build an Aero Mouse. Yeah.
But apparently there was also, in that same plot, they had talked about, so there was this weird period in Paramount where they were talking about, we talked about how Paramount just didn't build hypercoasters, even though they were like becoming a thing. They had talked about building like a hypercoaster there.
Yeah.
It was going to be a weird, wonky elevator thing or something, but
I've seen the concept. It was supposed to go all the way out to Demon.
Right.
Just weird.
Just weird.
And it was
just weird.
To the Brady Bunch.
To the Brady Bunch. I love it. It's my favorite.
The Brady Bunch.
It's hard to be international park pulls that stuff. Like,
the big elevator track thing had like the giant 9.
You know what?
Brady Bunch thing.
When you look at Roller Coaster Going 3 and it has that weird, like in the tilt coaster, you can build that weird like lift hill that like also tilts. Yeah. That's the first thing you think of when I think of the weird Morgan thing they were going to pull while thinking of pulling.
That they were going to build a Morgan coaster there. The fact that they actually 100%. Built a Morgan coaster at that park is kind of surprising because of
I just think that Stealth
project
in Vertigo was a little iffy, but that's just because for production models that push the limits, especially back in the day. But I think with Stealth they realized that we're not going to pull any stunts anymore because pulling stunts, it's like you market something, it doesn't run, bad rep, bad press, and it becomes one of those things where I think Stealth was like their second big prototype. Well, they've been a prototype park for years, right?
B&M prototypes and building 90s Vekoma prototypes.
I mean, this was pretty much like prototype
Yes, they
5.
Yes, they are.
And I think they realized, like, we're not going to pull this again. We're not going to do this with Hyper XLC because, like, now we're on.
Ultimately, why they called it on Hypersonic. Right. Well, I guess there was a couple of reasons. One, they were like, look, we're still knee deep in problems with Stealth. We don't really need this right now. If anything, Stealth is also going to be our 2001 new attraction because it's not running much for this year.
Luckily, Magic Mountain had this similar timeline where like they had Struggle Bus Central down there too. It was like X wasn't running and his Deja Vu wasn't running. And Scream was literally built because they needed something that would actually run as the billboards suggested it would, you know?
Right.
So at least it wasn't the only park struggling, and it almost like there was like this counterbalance down to 5 where it was like at least there's another park really struggling. Like everyone was trying to push the limits, but I think Great America gave up first.
Yeah,
because
they were the first one to give up. I mean, and this sounds bad, but they were up against Medusa, and Medusa like this hyper reliable, beautiful, and like I think about when I was even in like the 2010s. Like that coaster just looked so stunning, like unlike anything you'd ever seen before. Like, and you think the floorless were like, and you put it back in the context of 2000.
It still rules NorCal. Yeah. It is still the biggest thing in
gorgeous.
NorCal. And and people never make this connection, but I just made it, and thank you to you, Ian, for living that. Is that people always say like, well, it's just Scream is a clone or a mirror clone that's slightly taller than Bizarro, right? The Medusa in Great Adventure. But the real reason Scream was built is because Medusa and NorCal had such an impression on the market. It was cohesive.
Yes.
While there were struggling prototypes just down the road, even though the demographics didn't overlap, it's still a competing market in a way.
It
and
is, absolutely.
And I think Six Flags was like, you know what, this works. So they cloned the crap out of
choice.
An existing
attraction.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And I think
that was definitely rough, though. I mean, because Great America had been the roller coaster leader. Because I mean, before then, and we'll get to Marine World next, but the only two coasters they had were freaking relocated SLC and a Boomerang. And then they
Marine
are
World
like
is a fascinating story.
Which luckily, late '90s, these were incredibly acceptable rides. I mean, we talk about them a lot, as in they kind of put parks on a map that didn't have big rides. You know, the Boomerang was 6 inversions, backwards, forwards, 2 drops, everything.
Right.
And then the SLC offered, even though it doesn't quite compete with Top Gun, really, it still offers, a park with no rides, something impressive.
With Vertigo, but it still worked. It was still a good foundation.
Isn't that so funny how, prior to Medusa, Marine World really was just a marine park with the smaller versions of what
it was. They got the Premier Parks care package. Is what I always called it.
Yes,
here's your Boomerang.
They slapped a Boomerang in there.
Here's half a dozen.
I love when they literally called Boomerang Coast to Coast because they were putting him from coast to coast. They weren't even hiding it.
Coast to
Coast to coast,
Coast to coaster, because Great Escapes was still called that. The one at Darien Lake Gardens has the same little Boomerang ensign that the one I grew up with in Marine World. But yeah, the late '90s was, as a kid, I mean, I was totally spoiled. Growing up on theme parks, my parents, because my parents met working at the boardwalk, I mean, it was no surprise that they just really liked the amusement parks a lot. Both of them went to Disneyland and Magic Mountain as children. And so it wasn't hard for me to convince my parents that, we needed to go to Great America and the boardwalk pretty much constantly.
Right.
We had lived in Arizona for a couple of years, actually, in the mid-'90s, and then we ended up back in Scotts Valley in 1997. During those Arizona years, we spent a lot of time at Castles and Coasters, which was pretty new at the time. So that was my first looping coaster, was the Hopkins Desert Storm looping coaster at Castles and Coasters when I was 4 years old, summer of 1995.
Lord.
What an introduction. What an introduction. I was born in August, so it was probably right before I turned 5, but I was technically, and then we spent a lot of time at the boardwalk. I loved being at the boardwalk in the 90s because they were getting all sorts of funny stuff. The Jetstar, bless its soul, was replaced by the Hurricane in 1992, which is a huge part of my childhood. As a kid, I liked it just as much as the Giant Dipper. I couldn't appreciate that one was so much more special than the other, but I just really liked them all. The log flume at the boardwalk is the greatest gift that we could have ever hoped for from Great America and the influence of that park, because
it
they're
truly is.
You guys are building your giant aero log flumes. We're going to build a giant aero log flume too. And now the aero log flume Northern California chapter is just the boardwalk.
I know, it's so sad, but yes.
So I remember all of that happening very fondly, and yet my parents were insane. Because we went to Magic Mountain every year too, and we went to Disneyland every year, and we went to Marine. My parents took me to Marine World Africa USA before there was rides, just for fun. My parents took me to Mission Beach to ride the Giant Dipper when I was 6 because I'd already ridden the Santa Cruz one when I was 5, and they were like, "Well, you need to ride both." Come on now. And then when we didn't actually go to Marine World the first year that they had rides, but when they built Roar, my parents were like, "Let's go! This is cool."
Roar was the first power move because Roar was incredibly revolutionary for the wooden coaster escape, which is kind of funny, right? Because we talked about wooden coasters earlier in the episode.
Right, absolutely.
But if there's ever a product line that really kind of had its waves, I feel like wooden coasters have been got the history on those. And I think that was really the first power move.
But I just remember it like it was yesterday. My first trip to Great America that I can remember was my 6th birthday, August of 97. I distinctly remember riding the triple wheel and just loving it and just thinking this is cool. And I rode Tidal Wave and loved it. And I rode Grizzly and thought it was just banging. I rode
Bee's Knees.
Days of Thunder. Oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
All of this. And then the following year I was pissed because we went to Great America. I don't think we got season passes until 1999. But we went
just when it started getting good
in '98, and Vertigo was there. I'm like, I can't ride this. I'm not tall enough to ride this ride. Where is Triple Wheel that I was tall enough to ride? So that bothered me a lot at the time.
Wow.
I think that was why we waited to go to Marine World until 1999, because I wasn't tall enough.
Funny story on Vertigo real quick. Speaking of like seeing something and not being able to ride it, I went to Santa Clara for my very first time in the history.
Oh, yes. I love this story.
A month and a half after they closed in Vertigo, and I stayed at the hotel across the street from the park for Christmas. And I still lived in the Netherlands, and I had seen about this park on brochures and on the internet for years. And my dad even illegally trespassed into the parking lot to show me the theme park, including Top Gun. Oh. And I, from the hotel room, stared at Vertigo for 3 days straight, and I never got to ride it in that location because I just closed.
No.
Yeah.
We did ride it at Dorney Park. It was the best.
That's a rare credit.
The best coaster Dorney Park
credit
has ever had.
Yeah.
Sorry, don't at me.
But yeah, it's just funny.
We got 3 rides on it, and then they demolished it a couple months later. Much salt.
It is true.
But yeah, I remember in 1998 with like New Marine World. Fun fact: we moved to Nashville in 2001. Obviously, I never went to Opryland. My father went to Opryland.
Just when Great America really started giving up.
He went to Opryland in 1975 and rode the Wabash Cannonball the year it opened. And the Hangman suspended looping coaster from Vekoma was relocated to Marine World. So I did have an Opryland credit before we even moved to Nashville, long before I made the connection that they were those were relocated rides. But that was part of like Premier Parks was doing all. There was 1 year where Premier Parks had acquired Marine World, and so for that year when they built the rides, it was called the New Marine World. And then when Marine World, when Premier Parks acquired Six Flags, they renamed it Six Flags Marine World for the 1999 season.
And this is really, I think, when the market's like excitement shifted to Marine World. I feel like Six Flags was kind of like, okay, well, we've got something here, and I think they too could see the potential, but also the struggle down in the South Bay, right, where like Great America is like really starting to get developed around, and I think they really came in and said, okay, well, this is where the next big regional park is going to be.
Stealth was too much risk. I mean, Stealth was a disaster.
And it definitely was in Six Flags' favor that the infrastructure for the park was there. A unique product was already there. It wasn't like they were just going to move in with just a coaster park. I mean, they had a unique idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Six Flags, the CEO, even, what's his name, Jimmy Ederson, previous CEO, he even called it like Six Flags Little Gym. Yeah. Because it was Six Flags' chance to kind of do what they eventually failed at in Ohio.
In SeaWorld, right.
Yeah, right. And do it in a smaller scale and a little more of a secure scale, and it's the one that survived. And it's kind of, no matter how Six Flags Discovery Kingdom performs, I think Six Flags will always really love that property for what it did for them, So yeah,
something to this day, it always gets an impressive investment, impressive piece of the pie, I think.
Something I did want to ask about, because I'm not super familiar with it, is like what were Six Flags like plans for Marine World when they first bought it? What was there's so many concepts,
funny you should ask.
So many ideas. I'm curious, I'm sure our listeners are interested as well in what this idea was. It wasn't always going to be parking lot coasters.
So you got to kind of think about it like the timeline. I know that Six Flags can never be Disney, right? But the timeline is honestly kind of similar to like when Six Flags and Animal Kingdom were like, starting to become a thing. And even though they're opposite coast and it's Six Flags versus powerhouse Disney, there was definitely inspiration. I mean, imagine being a theme park chain that comes in, acquires a theme park that is already as nice and manicured and like as infrastructurally sound as Marine World was, and then kind of getting to put in your money you have, and like actually in a project. So like half the costs are already taken care of. So I think Six Flags really kind of had the idea of making this the next California power move and like owning the Bay, because competing in SoCal is so hard, right? Like if it was Thrill or nothing, but in the Bay area they could really own the market. I think
there was a niche that it was theirs to carve. It was their game to lose.
Absolutely.
So their plans, there were a lot of plans. Obviously, whenever anyone builds a new theme park or acquires a park to retrofit it, they concepts are skyrocketing, and everyone always has the greatest idea. So it doesn't always happen. But there were definitely some interesting plans, including a giant aviary in the African adventure area. There was supposed to be a jungle cruise kind of attraction going by extra animals.
Shocker.
I know, right? And then,
imagine that.
Interestingly enough, the Rapids ride, Whitewater Safari, It was actually supposed to be interwoven with several animal exhibits where you would kind of coast through it, and then there will be walkways also interacting with it, and with a bunch of different, levels of animal exhibits.
You know what that sounds like? Tiger River Rapids.
It sounds like Holly River Rapids.
The original
also
Holly
didn't
River
happen.
Rapids concept for Animal Kingdom that also was canceled because they decided.
I mean, look at these concepts.
Unmanned boats in animal enclosures is a bad idea.
Not the best idea.
Anyways,
not the best idea.
Let's continue.
So funny enough, like that part of the park, where all the animals are currently, it was really kind of supposed to be like Animal Kingdom. But on the front side, they wanted to take a bit of a different approach. So where the sharks were on the water side, they were trying to build a giant simulator ride. That will be about like a submarine voyage kind of simulator ride that would then exit out into the shark encounter, which I think is a really cool idea. I think it would have maybe even worked if they had the money for it. And that's kind of where like the big food plaza is now. That's where the simulator would have been. And then the exit would have been where the shark encounter existed.
And that's why Hammerhead is there. Okay, that makes sense.
Love Hammerhead. Okay, yes.
Early Zamperla. 90s era Zamperla.
Remember they had that Dino 4D attraction?
Yes.
Yep, that was supposed to be where they were actually adding a dinosaur-themed area with a dinosaur log flume that would go around, almost like around the 4D coaster. And Kong's entrance used to be there. And that was all kind of supposed to be together. Like Kong, that was all kind of supposed to be one area. And then the Medusa Plaza was supposed to exist as we see it, but in a little bit more of a flashy kind of
jungle
way.
Theme.
Yeah, Medusa was either supposed to be themed to Medusa with like a temple as its station, a little bit more fancy than we see it now, and then it was supposed to be over water, or they were going to make a Superman. In fact, there are more concepts for the Superman because it was supposed to be another Superman Krypton coaster.
That makes sense.
Like the one in Fiesta, Texas. Similar acquisition, similar timeline. Yeah. However, they went with Medusa to kind of keep it. They didn't put any DC comics into that property until 2012.
For a long time. If they wanted to,
they really weren't, because they were shy with that.
Bugs Bunny was,
and I almost kind of wish it was still like that, because my very first visit there was in 2011. No, it was early 2012, right before Superman was being built. Well, Superman was still under construction. I still remember putting track pieces in, and they still had the killer whale Shuka that went to SeaWorld, San Diego, and I remember distinctly loving how cohesive the park was, because it just felt like a SeaWorld with roller coasters. And I was like,
That's how, and that was when I visited the park, and that's how I felt as well. Because, I mean, what was odd, though, was, like, the cracks were showing, like the Rapids ride, and, like, the old, the disco, Zamperla disco, or whatever they had, and the Topspin was still running, and all of those kind of had that, like, temple-y jungle vibe that you could tell they were trying to do something cohesive. But that's obviously not there anymore, because I mean, I think it's become weakened with the addition of their kind of superhero
definitely
section.
Has been on like the new DC universe. It was a weird timeline
to
where,
their credit, at least all of the DC rides are in the same area.
That's the truth, because that is Six Flags, my biggest pet peeve. Like, y'all.
The only real outlier, I think, for the longest time was V2. Especially when they had to retrofit it and they repainted it like a year later. That was the one outlier, and because the whole park, even Boomerang, Kong, Medusa, Roar, they were all like, brown tones, red tones. It was all naturalistic. And then Green. V2 was like that, wow, look at this weird looking. I mean, it just was almost like an eyesore, but I guess like now that ride got saved.
But for those of you who don't know, this was an iconic moment in Premier Parks era Six Flags short-sightedness.
Yes, it is.
And foolishness.
Absolutely.
There is a 150-foot height imposition by the county that Marine World is located
Napa County,
in.
If I'm mistaken.
So they announced V2 vertical velocity alongside V2 vertical velocity at Six Flags Great America. And both roller coasters are 186 feet tall, or they were. So with the 150-foot height rule imposed by the county.
Yeah, let me bring it this way. Imagine marketing your biggest roller coaster to date that is 150 feet tall. You make sure the whole world knows it's 150 feet tall. Then you build right next to it a roller coaster that's 186 feet tall. Is that what the height is? And then you try telling the whole world that this coaster that clearly sticks out over your big market 150-foot roller coaster.
And an identical version of it at another park where
that you market as 186.
Is 186.
Yeah,
and so
and I'm pretty sure the freaking like Intamin ride placard literally says the height of the ride, dimensions.
Right. Yeah, so that happened, and the ride had to close.
That's the most expensive marketing stunt ever.
Feet over the local height. So they took the rear tower and chopped 30 feet of it off, but they relocated the holding brake, which was that was a cool thing that happened was the holding brakes on all these impulse coasters.
Impulse coasts, yeah.
And then they took the forward spiral spike and made it this long shootout thing with a barrel roll in it.
In fact, they actually had to remove the whole spike. The track was not used for that ride again. They had to completely custom support or custom create a second kind of version of it. And at the end, the ride ended up costing way more because there was way more track length. There were way more supports. I mean, I think the amount of steel infrastructure must have been at least doubled when they added.
At least with the supports over that plaza. And I know a lot of people love it. I kind of love it. It's so wonky.
I love it too because it's so different. It's like
so wonky.
You either get 3 inversions if you sit in front, or you get like 1 inversion if you sit in the back, or like 2, I guess. But I do think it's really cool, and I do think like going over the plaza, it did feel very powerful. It's like it's the first real Gatekeeper. You know, Gatekeeper was kind of like marked as in like reinventing the whole like marquee coaster interacting with the entrance. But like low key Vertical Velocity did it before it was cool.
I agree, 100%.
Not on purpose. But yeah,
but unintentionally, it became the marquee. I think what's interesting is like they've kept the additions going. Like Six Flags never really slowed down that much with Marine World, like with Discovery Kingdom. Like they've kept pushing the envelope.
I think it's very true, even where
Superman,
it wasn't necessarily necessary, because like they built Superman right in 2012, and then they moved Shuka later that year to SeaWorld San Diego, and so then they added new dolphin shows, 2 of them the year after. And then, so they kind of, in the beginning, kind of had this balance between, like, so we're going to reinvest in the existing animal kind of aspect and then slowly introduce the DC characters. Now it's kind of really moving to the DC expansion area, but I think they actually saw returns. And that is the big indicator in the current theme park market, is if you see a return on an investment. I mean, there are parks that just build stuff just to keep attendance the same, Kings Island. But then there's properties that may actually see a return in investment. And I think Discovery Kingdom saw the marketability behind DC, and I think they just gave it a big push. And then Joker, I don't even think Joker had to happen because Roar was a perfectly fine roller coaster. But then they introduced Gold Striker, and Roar was, in a way, it was no longer, the most exciting wooden coaster in Northern California. And so I think that was kind of what pushed them over the limit. But yeah, you're right. Unlike Great America, which has seen a lot of infrastructural upgrades over the years, their roster really hasn't grown much. As where Discovery Kingdom's roster just, boom. My first visit there, they had like half the rides they have now, and it's just crazy how much they've added.
It is crazy. It's very crazy. It's just, and the rapid expansion, the amount of money that Six Flags. After Great Adventure and after Magic Mountain, it really is kind of one of the favorites alongside of Fiesta Texas in terms of the amount of money they're putting into it. And Great America, I guess. The Great America's has its Six Flags Great America is having some weird, I feel like is in a weird place right now as well. I think that this is the big question, and we'll probably have to, I don't know, this is going to take too long, maybe, but which of the 2 parks is the regional leader now? Has Cedar Fair been able to push Great America back up to the status as the regional leader or not?
Here's the thing. From my personal experience, I used to love Six Flags Discovery Kingdom more. Like when I started going to both of them consistently, in the beginning, Gold Striker was cool, but the rest of it was like putting lipstick on a pig. I thought Great America was under-maintained, it was outdated, it wasn't clean. It's where Discovery Kingdom was one of few Six Flags parks. No hate on Six Flags, but it's one of few Six Flags parks that's actually really cohesive,
really well
clean,
maintained, and
it looks good. And then Great America, especially in like around 2013, 2014-ish, it was just ugly besides, the front plaza with Gold Striker. And Top Gun was still black. And it wasn't until like Cedar Fair really started putting in the investment and just making Great America look presentable first before adding anything else that the tables started kind of turning. And then Discovery Kingdom started focusing, in my opinion, too much on just pumping investments into new attractions, and like DC making it flashy and colorful to the point where Discovery Kingdom shouldn't even be the name of the park anymore. But then their operations started eating shit. Like Discovery Kingdom used to be like polished, and it used to be cohesive, and food was great, and operations were really good because a few rides they had really had to carry something, right? And there were awesome shows because that was still a main draw. And now I feel like Discovery Kingdom overcompensated by just like, going crazy in the DC character with the DC characters and the merchandising and trying so hard to appeal to this like marketability that the other Six Flags parks have been struggling with for years, that they lost that operational touch. They lost that animal touch. I mean, there's been the Drench Theater, the Toyota Stadium, where they've had like their biggest dolphin show. It's been missing pieces for like several seasons now, and it's just it's become one of those things where like I'm starting to notice that, and it was the one Six Flags park in the entire chain that didn't have that problem. And now Great America is pulling up towards the King's Dominion, Kings Island level of like what I kind of consider the Paramount troop, where I think the Paramount properties in the Cedar Fair chain are all the cleanest ones. I mean, Canada's Wonderland looks good.
Absolutely.
Obviously, Carowinds is a really clean park, and Great America is one of the cleaner ones now too. Now to really clean it up, it meets the Santa Clara aesthetic. Really, like it's a clean property now.
I just love that they went through and they repainted the coasters. Like, do you guys remember briefly when like they repainted Flight Deck red and they were going to rename it Touchdown?
Yeah, because it was it was coinciding with the 49ers
It would have been
stadium.
so cute.
And
I know.
because it was already red, and I was like, oh, they're going to paint the
Yeah,
chains
it would have been
gold.
so cute.
Oh, I was excited.
Oh, it was so cute.
I accepted that headcanon immediately. And then they did Patriot, which I love Patriot. I don't care what anyone says.
I think it's so cute.
It looks great. It looks great as a blue roller coaster.
Yeah,
so.
they had a great cleanup that's been very gentle to the park. But will I say it's the biggest player in NorCal? I'm actually going to say no. Because at the end of the day, their roster is a little outdated. I mean, if your biggest attraction is a wooden coaster are great. Don't get me wrong. I love wooden coasters, especially GCIs. But the problem here is that like we're looking at the California theme park landscape, and there's so much in that landscape that if your biggest attraction is a GCI wooden coaster, I don't think your park necessarily.
You wouldn't say their biggest is Railblazer?
No, I don't. I mean, Rollblaze honestly didn't perform the way they expected.
Not the biggest, true.
Right,
and I still think that. I mean, Rollblaze is really small compared to Gold Striker.
Well, the thing with Railblazer is it's not a large scale ride. Like I liked it. And like before we go into like my decision is, I will say when I visited my parents for Christmas break when Railblazer was new, and I went to Winterfest. And like as someone who I spent my years in that park from 08 through like 11, like that was when I was spending the most
really
time in that park, which were like the darkest, like the darkest of the darkest age, right when the Paramount to Cedar, the Paramount handed over to Cedar Fair era, you know what I mean? And like the investments had stopped, and both management was just kind of not caring about the park. Going to Winterfest, like I actually got emotional, like how well maintained the buildings all were, and like how they were repainted, the paths had been repaved, like it felt like a better version of like a memory that I had. I don't know, it's bizarre, but like it for me, like that was like you could tell Cedar Fair had at least pumped some money into the park and was taking care of the park again. Like I remember being excited about Firefall.
even in 2013, my first visit, I thought the park was so ran down that I was like hands down a Discovery Kingdom boy. But I will say that my favorite park in Northern California, that's not the boardwalk, of the two major players is Great America. I just don't think it's the leader because they just haven't quite been keeping up with their rapid investments. And I think this really, whether or not I like it or not.
Will be very telling because I feel like they're going to.
I'm honestly scared.
Discovery Kingdom's going to plateau because I think that like they've gotten this slew of strong investments, but now like they need to fix other things with the park. Harley Quinn's Gravy Train or whatever it's called is like really complicated and crappy. And like
but you got to remember that. Well, they're still going to get Safari Sidewinder next year, so they're getting it. Yeah, no, I mean it was just delay in manufacturing, which is what stopped it.
So Fiesta Texas was supposed to get a kiddie coaster, one of those double figure eight ones like Cobra at Discovery Kingdom, and it was there, and it was on the park map, and it was there out in pieces. And it never opened. Well, it got sent somewhere else.
Well, with that statement, I mean, Mr. Six's dance coaster sat next to Deja Vu and still got built in different places in the park. So everything's possible.
All I'm saying is that this Sierra Mist or whatever it's called, the Sidewinder thingy, is not it's not there until it's there.
Okay, well, from what I've heard from within the marketing team from Discovery Kingdom, it is definitely still on schedule. It's just a delay because of COVID in Italy where the ride is being manufactured. So with all intents and purposes, the ride will be added. So I think
sorry, I was going to say, now the question is, if Great America was supposed to get the hyper. Everyone talks about the Great America hyper. That's obviously no longer a reality. What do you think, and I guess this goes to our last big topic is, what do you think the future holds for both the parks? So we have Sidewinder Safari, Sierra Sidewinder, whatever that is.
Yeah.
We know that's what's next for Sierra Mist the Ride.
Yeah.
We know that's what's next for Discovery Kingdom. What's next for Great America?
Well, real quick, before we move over to what's next for Great America, I do want to say that once, because Safari Sidewinder is like on the near horizon, what I think for the long shot for Discovery Kingdom is, I think the Discovery Kingdom is going through an identity change. Parks do that once in a while, right?
Yep.
Where like they kind of flip the switch and like we're going to do this now. I think Discovery Kingdom took these years to really figure out what is their best fit. Thrill direction, family direction. I'm hearing family is really what the park ends up being, because of all the animals and stuff. So I think that they just got new lion cubs last year. I think the direction really is going to shift back to their original identity. But I think they had to have that marketing push to push them just a little bit ahead. To have the DC ride, to have Batman, to have Superman, to have Joker. Those are three incredibly strong players that kind of like...
And the Flash. They're like one of the only parks that has a Flash ride, and it's a marquee coaster.
It's one of those things where like they had to build a little bit of a stronger foundation because Zeus, as we all know, Zeus and Marine Parks went through an incredibly rough patch around Blackfish. And I think that's what pushed them to put in a bit of a foundation in like the thrill rides and the DC aspect of things. And I think that they are keeping that as is. And I think they're going to go back now to, zoos are getting more respect now. And I think they're going to clean up that aspect. And I think their future is laid out for them. They have a really strong foundation, a much stronger ride lineup, I think, than any other park in the region. And I think now they're going to go back to cleaning it up and making the zoo look nice and having that Safari Sidewinder as like the new zoo relaunch, right? That's what I think the Discovery Kingdom is doing. Great America, on the other hand, is a bit of a scarier story because
their water park expansion looks cute.
Yeah, but it looks very...
Why wasn't it named Yankee Harbor? That's all I have to say. They could have just named it Yankee Harbor. It would have been so cute.
I know.
God damn it.
California's Great America.
We got Carolina Harbor and Cedar Point Shores. Why did we not get Yankee? I don't know. They just don't care.
Because South Bay Shores
I'm so angry about it.
I guess
I would have redeemed that damn edition so hard because we finally returned... anyways.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, that water park has always sucked forever, so it's kind of nice to see them finish.
Yeah, which was more stealth of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
You should have seen me when I was 12 years old trying to wrap my head around the fact that Stealth was going to Carowinds. We had already left. We had already moved to Nashville.
The main reason Stealth went...
I was not there for Grease Lightning's departure, thank God, because my heart would have...
I just think that Stealth had built such a bad reputation that the word Stealth was a sour taste.
Well, I think
they could just remarket it with a big Star Trek IP somewhere down the road. Now they figured it out.
Capacity was going to be a huge problem that they did not see. I mean, even... So, like, the two Premier Parks Flying Dutchmans, Six Flags Americas and Jocko Lakes... Those were Paramount contracts that Paramount sold while they were being developed because they were so unhappy with Stealth. And even though those solved some problems, they definitely huge improvement on the ride layout, huge improvement on capacity with like the multiple stations and stuff. They found out very quickly that like Stealth was not going to work for a park that they really wanted to squeeze as much capacity out of as possible.
Right.
Vertigo was already kind of a mistake for any park that was like capacity, because that ride was inconsistent and it's a one train coaster.
God, on their early developments, like can't believe they didn't do station roofs. That's my biggest pet peeve at that park for always.
Oh, yeah.
I don't understand why station roofs were like not a thing for that park only.
My biggest memory, Stealth got a station roof, but not a brake run roof. And I remember my eyeballs getting sunburned waiting for the train to dispatch. It's a Great America thing. Great America, yeah.
It is a Great America thing. Though I will say, I think that like the Demon at Gurney also doesn't have a station roof. So I don't know if that was just
the legacy with like Marriott and then like
the
California held on.
A roof. The Wizard has no roof in Santa Clara.
It's legacy of Marriott right there.
But Grease Lightning did have a loop, or had a roof.
Tidal wave had a roof, yeah.
And
a roof.
Oh, sorry. And the, what was I going to say?
I think for Great America, it's kind of like the opposite of Discovery Kingdom. It's like, so they have that like really clean, polished aesthetic now. With the water park open, the last eyesore is gone. They have a product that they can sell. It's a clean product. Like someone will come and be like, "Oh, this is a nice park." But now I think they're going to have to switch into the marketability thing where like they're going to have to add things that are really going to pull people in to see how nice it is now. Because I'm sure there's people that think of the park but still think of it as like the ugly days. And that's like that's the hardest thing about like cleaning yourself up. You got to get those people back in for them to believe it first. You can tell them it's nice. You can tell them it's cool. But they're not going to come because they still have that idea of how bad it is, right? And so for them,
100%.
For them, they're going to have to pull people in. And I think they're doing a good job with Winterfest. It's a really strong competitor to Six Flags. It's really good holiday in the park events. Like, I'll get that to Six Flags. They have good holiday events. And then Haunt, they have a good Haunt event. It really helps that they get the Not Scare Farms things passed to them. You know, like it runs at Knott's and it comes to Haunt. So they always have high quality stuff. So I think for them, the focus really needs to be that bringing in the single day ticket holder, you know, the high profit margin with the special events, which they do for Winterfest and for Haunt, and use that revenue now to pump in marketable attractions to bring in the day-to-day guest, the season pass holder in a really scary market. And you have to think about, like, the people who live there have money in the immediate area.
Yeah, the Silicon Valley is crazy.
Can easily go and stay at the Grand Californian for their weekend, and you know, and fly down to SoCal. Like I know people who do that, who live in Silicon Valley, who fly down for the weekend to stay at the Grand Californian. So they have that status now. They look clean. They definitely look Silicon Valley ready. But now they really got to bring those people back in, and I think that's the biggest obstacle because you got to make the money to put in expensive expansions. So I think that's the biggest problem.
I keep asking myself what's going to happen to Grizzly because that ride has been on life support.
I've seen the RMC plans, but given the lack of performance, I don't think it's going to happen.
Railblazer, and we have Joker not far, and it's obviously
this sounds bad. I've never liked RMC Grizzly, even like in the early days when people talked about it. I thought it was silly. It just, if anything, give it a GCI retrack and give us a classic Woody and then a Twister Woody. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just sick of RMC. I don't know.
Because they're going to demolish.
I think you're right.
Demolish. Barney Oldfield Speedway is not quite the same.
That's a good plot for.
They took one of the tracks out. So this giant concrete pad, and you're only driving on the right side of it. I'm like, oh, this poor ride. Like both of those rides.
It's true.
I think both of those rides just need to be put out of their misery. And they need to
at the same time, that park's balance of rides, I think, will be really incomplete without Grizzly. Because as of right now, if you look at kind of what they've got, they have kind of these two categories. It's like the sort of big, but not big in world class status. You know, like Top Gun or Flight Deck and Patriot and Gold Strike. I kind of consider them one level, and even Railblazer, they're lumped together. And then you have like the family rides, and I think Grizzly is kind of like in between that.
Too much, I think, to be considered like a family ride. But
I guess it's true.
Right.
I suspect that, assuming Great America will continue to operate,
I think they're just right.
I don't think they're going to RMC Grizzly anymore. I don't think there's a shot. I think they're just going to demolish it. I think the whole thing is going to get.
I think they're going to go with low budget, high marketability, like a brand new water park that costs the same as a flat ride.
Yeah,
but it's just it's 6 new slides and a new water park advertising.
I think some sort of family coaster is going to replace Grizzly. I think, and it's going to be from the ground up. It's not going to be. I don't think it's going to be a wooden coaster. I don't think it's going to be anything that remotely resembles what has been there. And they better put a nice flat ride where the rest of Invertigo's plot was, because I know that like Railblazer occupied part of Invertigo's plot and also part of the Flight Commander plot.
Right.
But I think we need another flat ride in that circle, the Inverti Garden.
Yeah.
The triple wheel garden originally.
That's right.
Classic. I think bring back the triple wheel. I think that so going back to like what is California's Great America's future? Like, what are the rumors? I don't know if our readers are familiar with the rumors. If you guys want to go over the rumors,
are not holding a lot of ground, but I do see people coming from. So Cedar Fair purchased all the land to California's Great America.
Right.
They released a 10-year plan, very ambitious, to convince the city, including like a relocation of Wicked Twister.
To building a new one, like Chongqing.
Or a new one from Chongqing. But I could imagine. I don't think Cedar Fair wants to put that much money into it. And then there's a couple other big attractions that they mentioned, like Hypercoaster, which is pretty much off the table. Even though they were very serious about it, we were told in confidence.
It looks like
at one point that they were definitely going to add that after the water park. But I guess it is not happening anymore. And especially in this market,
did not.
So
scales for them.
The rumor is that Cedar Fair may sell off the park back to the city for like redevelopment of the land. Now, few things why I don't really think that would happen is, first of all, they just built a giant modern stadium in like 2014, right on that same land. So like, is the city of Santa Clarita really gonna demolish one of the country's biggest stadiums right at, like, 6 years after it's built just because COVID? I doubt it. Cedar Fair owns that land now. They worked so hard to own it. Are they really gonna give it up that quickly? Yes, it'll be a nice amount of cash that, especially is helpful after your parks have been down for a year. But I just don't know. And that's a pretty short-sighted decision.
Right.
And they put so much money into the park, even through COVID-19, like through the closure, they have been actually repainting, redeveloping things in the park.
Yeah,
most parks don't even do that during the pandemic.
Right.
The
so cute.
different
so
colors
cute.
Yeah, so
it's amazing.
The park looks better than it ever has. Maybe better than it even looked when it opened, in my opinion. I mean, it is a pleasant park.
I agree.
It is. They think Cedar Fair's cleanest park.
I think
almost.
people sleep on Great America's landscaping. Like the original Marriott design is strong.
It's super clean.
It's very pretty. The use of water and like the
Whitewater
bridges
Falls,
to like transition areas.
The gardening around Whitewater Falls.
I love that.
Stunning.
Love that.
I've been to the park
So
on days where it's semi-busy and I don't quite feel like waiting for stuff. And I generally just enjoy being there and being on the sky ride 10 times a day. Like
I mature palm trees.
do like being there.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And California weather is great, so like it's always nice out. The sun's always shining, and the park is beautifully landscaped. And they worked really hard towards getting there. Because if you guys haven't been, or you've been after all the new stuff, guys, if you're listening, I kid you not, it was a really, really rundown place. Like I really thought it was. I mean, I kid you not, I was riding Grizzly in 2014. I stood on the stairs to the station. I looked at the little control booth under the station. There was a Paramount ticket. There was a Paramount season pass still laying there.
Right.
People hadn't been under the station cleaning literally in like 8 years. It was it was not cool. And so
I mean, even in the 90s,
they really cleaned up their
act.
act.
To look at, like it wasn't really what.
The aesthetic in the 90s was definitely kind of like gray everywhere.
And Vertigo was not pretty. Stealth was.
But neither was Magic Mountain. Magic
it was
Mountain
the Paramount.
Like
the Paramount aesthetic.
too.
It was kind of more about just building stuff that was interesting. But now it's like, no, we want to build something that pass holders will want to hang out at, even if they're not writing anything.
So yeah, I just don't think the rumors don't really hold that much ground. If you saw us post about it, I mean, it's social media. We post everything we see. Just
just for
it's discussion,
I
it's
make
engagement. It's like
stuff just for clout, like.
But I really don't think
I
it's
know
going to
you
go
do.
anywhere.
I know you do.
I love my memes.
I think one last thing we forgot to mention is Gilroy Gardens and where that fits into this. And I think Gilroy Gardens is such a funny little park. And I described it in the article I wrote as like the only like truly European style park in America.
Yeah.
Like talk about
it is all about the gardens.
God, yeah.
All about the cutesy little rides and not owned, but operated by Cedar Fair now. And I think complements Great America in a kind of cute way. And those two definitely share a market versus the other parks.
And I think it's actually really good that Great America operates the park. They don't own it. The city still does, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm just happy that they operate it because that way they don't cannibalize each other. Even though there was not a lot of cannibalizing to begin with.
There wasn't,
It's a small park that's not as easily accessible as Great America is. And, it's just dangerous. Small parks, there's not as much of a guarantee unless there's a powerhouse behind it.
Correct.
Cedar Fair is. Really cute park. Where does it fit in the lineup? I know of people that went from SoCal literally to NorCal just to go to Gilroy Gardens and come back, and they're not theme park nerds.
Yeah.
So I guess there's still quite some.
It
holds quite some ground.
Are like historic landmark.
Iconic.
They're
Absolutely.
And
priceless.
They are really heavy in the special events department. They have a winter event that's really special. They have a Lunar New Year event, if I'm not mistaken, that's renowned. So it's a small park, great for big company picnics, great for a fun day out with younger kids with a lot of shade, which is always nice.
Quicksilver Express slaps.
Super cute, right?
Classic mine train, yeah. And then the first mine train of Northern California. Let's be honest.
And the only Morgan mine train.
Yeah. Fun fact, when I was a little boy and we were selling...
You're a little boy?
Yeah. There's a lot of, like, when I was a little boy stories about...
That's this whole episode.
That happened,
Yeah, we're going to call it Alex's little boy adventure.
Our real estate agents were best friends with some people who knew Dana Morgan personally. Because Dana Morgan's a car guy, and our real estate agent is a car guy. Yeah, it was actually like our real estate agent's husband.
In case you wonder if Dana Morgan liked cars,
really fun. Oh yeah,
makes sense.
And so they were like, well, once they realized that I was like a coaster guy, they were like, okay, so he needs to go visit the plant. I went to the Morgan manufacturing plant and got to see all the Bonfante Gardens rides, as it was known at the time, while they were being manufactured. So I think I got to like sit in the Quicksilver Express ride vehicle like when it was at the plant. And they were I remember they were telling us about like this enormous roller coaster that they just sent to Japan, which was Steel Dragon 2000. But they were like, oh, it's too bad you weren't here a couple months ago because you would have seen all of this. The whole shop was just floor to ceiling red track for this 8,000-foot coaster we just built for Japan.
It's wild.
Which is my favorite Giga, by the way.
Check out our Giga article. Okay, keep going.
I guess.
It's still crazy that Morgan built that, but
oh god, that ride is fantastic.
Even crazy is when a wheel flew off when it hit someone.
So crazy.
That's real crazy.
Hit someone in the wave pool and they died. So crazy.
Could you imagine you're minding your damn business in a wave pool and a coaster wheel hits you and murders you?
Japan problems.
That is not kawaii, just so you know.
No, not quite.
But yeah, interestingly enough, like, so I saw the Gilbert Gardens rides under construction at the Morgan plant. I love how every ride there is like food. Like, there's the artichoke ride and the
garlic ride
and the
so
mushroom
cute.
ride and the banana ride. Like,
my favorite thing about that whole park is I love the little parks where like coasters that would literally not have a single line at a big park, or like the highlight attraction. So like Quicksilver has this giant queue and like educational plaques and trees and huts, and then you get to the station. It's like this giant station. It's literally like a little mine train. But it's like, you know, it carries up parks like, you know, it's kind of their big thing, and I love that.
What's interesting is like, so I saw all this stuff under construction. I didn't go to Gilroy Gardens until 2014.
That's funny. I've been to that park before you.
12 years after I saw all the rides and like sat in the vehicle
being built.
Also, I had been to Valley Fair by that point, and I had my little like my Wild Thing T-shirt, and I was so excited to wear it to show Dana Morgan. I was like, look, this is a roller coaster. And I met Steve Okamoto too. Like, it was
my heart.
As a child, like, we have all these pictures of us together. Cool. Steve Okamoto was in the middle of designing the Mexico hypercoaster.
Wow.
For Six Flags.
What an
Mexico.
icon, though.
Yeah, love that ride.
So I guess this leads us to our final question, right? Which is what is our final question?
Well, the final question is. It's a fun one because it's also the final question of the article that Ian wrote that is coinciding with this podcast episode. And that is, where do you think the Northern California theme parks stand within the U.S. theme park market? And we don't answer that in the article, but we do answer it here. So, Ian, you're going to be the one answering that first because you probably thought about it more.
I'll start it first. I think if we get a coaster, if Great America is able to get that headline attraction that it needs, that it really has needed, an attraction that's better than any of the rides in Southern California, that is like one of the best, like
Fury 325
can stand as one of the best coasters in the state.
Yeah,
that's what it needs. That would make a difference. As it stands now, I think the most unique asset of Northern California remains the boardwalk, which is funny to say that, but I think that and the article I first wrote for you all was not the first one. I wrote about basically ranking all the different parks in America that I think are essential. I think Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk is the boardwalk park of America, and I think that even to this day, that is something that I think people should visit the area for. But unless Great America adds that headline coaster, I don't see it really ever becoming a major player. It's so close. That's the thing. All the pieces are there for it to be a pretty significant region.
What do you think of
the market as a whole? I think that I don't know if Silicon Valley has the taste for theme parks, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It kind of comes down to my idea of like people who live and work there, they have money and time to play. Just fly down to Disneyland for a weekend and do an all-inclusive thing, you know? So I think it kind of... Yeah, I agree with that.
It's unfortunate, but like the population is so wealthy. Great American has had to step up its game. I just don't know if it's enough. So I think that for me, I think in the American coaster landscape, I think Santa Cruz is always going to be a treasure. The Giant Dipper is always going to be a treasure. I think that the other two parks are on shakier ground than many of the other regional parks that have seen a resurgence recently, and in like the Cedar Fair parks, we've seen Carowinds and all those as well.
It's fair enough. I think for the market itself, on a scale of the U.S., of course, Central Florida, Southern California, are the biggest markets, and then you have the little Pennsylvania tri-state area where you have like Hershey, Dorney, Great Adventure, American Dream. They're all really close, and that is a pretty solid market. Now, where does Northern California comes in? I do think Northern California has one of the most varied markets for the few attractions it has. I mean, the Boardwalk, Gilroy Gardens, Great America,
and
Discovery
Kingdom
are
in terms
all
of variety.
Completely differently. If you want to see dolphins jump out of the water, or you want to be in one of the oldest water coasts on Earth, it is all within a few hours.
That's very true. That's very true.
But when it comes to like where it stands, if your region's biggest coaster is still a 2,000 Florida's coaster, in the U.S. In the U.S. market, we always look at roller coasters and record breakers, and though I don't agree with that on a personal level, it is what we look at, and I want to stick with that in this conversation too. As where Medusa, I love you, but you're still NorCal's biggest thing, but it's also been 20 years, and I think that you can pump as many colors and IPs into your parks that you want, but are you going to be on the map for the coast enthusiasts that all have to fly to you because you're so removed from the rest of the markets? Mm-hmm. No, I don't think so, unfortunately.
I agree. Unfortunately, like I said, I think if there was a headline that could bring people to the region, like a Fury, it would be different. But there's just not.
Yeah. There just isn't, yeah. And I don't think it's going to happen.
I don't think so either. Especially not because a lot of regions are removed enough from other clusters that like whatever one park does will be competitive in the region. But then you have you have California where like, okay, so like Great America built a really big roller coaster, right? Great. They won up Discovery Kingdom. But just down the street, a couple hours driving, you still have the roller coaster capital of the world, arguably.
Right.
Magic Mountain, right?
Right, Magic Mountain,
stellar lineup, Knott's Berry Farm, super, super, super strong gate. And then, of course, the Universal Disney SeaWorld. So even if the Northern California parks were to add something super major, and I think that's why they haven't. I think that's why their last big things were in the late 90s, early 2000s, is because at the end of the day, you still compete. The world is more connected than ever. You can hop on a super cheap flight between the two cities or between the two regions. You can drive down a couple hours. There's just no need for them to add something really large because at the end of the day, they just can't compete with Disney and stuff down there, I think.
And it's really the West Coast kind of dichotomy. People don't realize how spread out it is. Like for us, like on the East Coast and even in Florida, like we can drive to so many different parks and it's so different. And there's more fluidity in the markets. Like there, it's just different. Like in terms
they really only feed from the West Coast. Like people from like Oregon and Washington will come down, but other than that, it's a self-contained market. Yeah. And if markets don't really bleed, there's no people coming in from any. I mean, these are deserts, guys. Like besides the big cities in California and in Oregon and Washington, there really isn't much in that side of the country.
No,
and if people are going to travel all the way east, all the way west, they're not going to travel to Great America or Discovery Kingdom. It's really more of a. At the end of the day, it's purely a regional park. They're not destination parks, and I think that's why they will never quite shine as large as the other markets in the U.S. But having said that, I do think it's kind of like SoCal, one of the most diverse. They do deserve to be mentioned along with Central Florida. I think Central Florida, Southern California, Northern California, those two markets are the three most diverse. Because they have that animal aspect and the marine aspect that a lot of other regions don't have. So.
Absolutely.
That is my final opinion. What about your
I love it. It's very good.
Do you have anything to add to that?
I just can't stop thinking about like where Great America is going to go from here because it's just funny how I guess with Discovery Kingdom you could ask yourself, but I don't care as much. Like.
Yeah, but Discovery Kingdom is also on Vallejo. Like
I'm right there with you, but I don't know why.
Will always give me a reason to care, and Discovery Kingdom will always give me a reason to be
Discovery Kingdom will never
Six Flags.
Discovery Kingdom will never have the fear of like at least for the next 25 years of like big tech companies coming in to swallow the land, and I think that's always kind of been the theme down south.
As long as the boardwalk is open, I could live with anything. A meteor could hit Great America, and as long as the boardwalk is fine, I don't.
The meteor is Great America.
I could live with it. Like anything could happen to Great America, and I could live with it as long as the boardwalk.
I wonder what the structural integrity of your beloved Giant Dipper is if a meteor hits Great America. That's a different story.
So that's a different hypothetical. Absolutely.
I mean the Santa Cruz Giant Dipper did a lot better in our, earthquakes of the last
It did.
35 years. It did a lot better than Cyclone did at Magic Mountain, that's for sure.
That Cyclone, though.
Sad.
That's a whole special craze.
That is a whole episode just about the Cyclone.
Yeah.
But I do think that I think the treasure remains, like I said, Santa Cruz.
Yeah.
And I think that I personally think we need to hype up Santa Cruz as a destination more. As someone from Northern California, I think it's an experience that everyone needs to have.
It's super it is West Coast to the max,
seeing,
honestly.
People who've been on the East Coast their entire lives. Like that CoasterCon in 2014 was so fun because it was a lot of people who had never been to Santa Cruz, and they went to the boardwalk and they're like, oh my god, like they cannot believe. I mean, they can absolutely.
When I say I miss like West Coast, which I do miss West Coast, like we talk about it quite a bit personally. That's the sort of thing I miss. I feel like that the California vibe. It is honestly a bit of a different vibe. And Santa Cruz really encompasses the vibe everyone always talks about. You know,
yeah,
like
absolutely.
the West Coast, Best Coast, California thing.
Santa
Cruz is the epicenter.
And like San Diego,
you know, Santa Cruz, San Diego,
absolutely,
Venice, Santa Monica. Like it's just different, and but when it comes to the park that captures that is Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk. Totally, it just lives
the
that.
The best compliment you can get from like an Easterner about the boardwalk is I heard it all day. They're like, oh my god, it reminds me of Knoebels, but it's a boardwalk, or like, oh my god, this reminds me of when Indiana Beach was good, or like,
wow.
I mean,
people like never mention those two in the same sentence
Indiana
again.
Beach is awesome now again, but it was really bad for a really long time. So. Or they're like, oh my god, this is the Coney Island that my grandparents went to, like, all of this superlative language, and then there was a lot of naysayers who thought they hated Morgan trains, and then they rode the Giant Dipper and they ate so much crow because the Giant Dipper kicks ass, and the Morgan trains do not make or break that ride.
Yeah, those things
saved
different
that ride.
Yeah.
At all, absolutely.
And there's other coasters that the Morgan trains run really well on.
Colossus run well.
The Jackrabbit at Seabreeze is lit. So not enough people have been there, I guess, but it's like, I don't want to hear you say that Morgan trains are crap when, like, the Dragon Coaster in Ride Playland and the Jackrabbit, the Giant Dippers, like, these are priceless roller coasters that are 100 years old. And they exist because Morgan built plastic roller coaster trains in the 70s and just thought, like, why not? Like, okay, this seems like... Before that, they were building roller coaster trains out of, like, copper pipes and spare lumber. Like, that was just... Yeah,
do you think your PTC tears up the track? Think again.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there was definitely PTCs being used, too. But, like, the Giant Dippers, those Frank Pryor Church trains that, like, the Giant Dipper was running...
Literally, literally pipe. Literally
seat like 12 passengers, and they would carry so much weight, and it's like they would crash right through the bottoms of the drops. So, like, the plastic trains were integral to, like, not only for maintaining the ride, but they were like, well, let's get 24 people or 20 people per dispatch on this coaster by reducing the actual weight of the trains. So, for me, growing up on the West Coast and loving roller coasters is to appreciate what Morgan has done for the entire region, whether it's saving the Dipper coasters or giving us the pretty much the bread and butter of the Gilroy Gardens, like the business end of the Gilroy Gardens operation. Everything except the trees and the dirt is Morgan, you know, at Gilroy Gardens. So, and with that, Arrow, of course, too.
And with that, with the last shout out to the Northern Californian manufacturers, we're going to end this Northern Californian episode. To make us take a record again for longest episode in the history of the podcast.
I'm so sorry.
No, I actually kind of enjoyed this. We have actually not done a California Pacific episode yet, so I really enjoyed that, and I think it's kind of fun going back to our roots because we did start as California Coaster Kings. So for all of our longtime followers who are 7 years in with us, this one is for you. Thank you, Ian, for instigating or starting that with your article. Before we end the recording, we're going to just do a quick run over of some recent things we've got that may interest you. We have a bunch of new episodes. In fact, we've been releasing new Coaster Kings Radio episodes every single week over the last 2 months. By the time you hear this, I think there'll be... how many new episodes do we have this season? Like at least 15, I think, by the end of the season. Yeah. So quite some episodes, awesome articles. We launched web shops. In fact, we have a US web shop. And we also added a European web shop because of shipping costs. So now you don't have to worry about high shipping costs or weird European import and taxes and stuff. So that's awesome. Check that out. And then, of course, check out the Northern Californian article from Ian if you want to kind of look back and not be confused by all of our rumble and yelling about stealth. And check that out. And then, of course, if you have any questions or have any topics that you want to communicate with us or for future podcast episodes, reach out to us by email, social media channels, anything like that. And we're going to wrap it up. So thank you, Ian, for joining us. This is really fun.
Thank you all.
I look forward to doing another one. Maybe
I look forward to talking to you all again soon. Maybe we just do a whole episode on Flying Dutchman. That would be interesting.
I would love to do that.
Okay.
All right. Goodbye, Ian.
Bye, Ian.
Bye.